on his hand started dying down. "Stop him," he rasped out as he collapsed on the ground. The blonde checked the man and shook his head. He was dead. A lot of question ran through his head. He wondered who attacked the guards and what the attacker was looking for. Standing back up, he looked towards the metal door and walked over to it. The door was open. He peered inside. He could see a long hallway illuminated by the same crystals that were illuminating the room he was in. He stepped inside and continued his mission. After walking for a few minutes, he entered in another chamber. His eyes narrowed as he unsheathed his sword. In front of him stood a large number of skeletons. They were all guarding a large metal door. They took a step forward and then charged towards him. He was surprised by their speed. He jumped out of the way as a large sword slammed in the ground where he once stood. The skeleton pulled it out of the ground with ease and continued its attack. He ducked under its next attack, and then with one swift motion he cut the skeleton in half, making its bones fall on the ground in a pile. Fire burst in front of him as numerous arrows hit the blonde's defense. He turned to face the archers. His fire shot forward and slammed in them, destroying them. Naruto then turned to face the close-range fighters. He raised his sword and blocked a skeleton's attack. He slammed in it, making it fall on its back. Its skull was shattered as the blonde stepped on it. He spun around and raised his sword, blocking another attack. Fire appeared around the sword's blade as the jumped backwards and then slashed the air in front of him. A wall of fire burst from the blade, burning down its foes. His eyes widened, however, as the skeleton stood up from the attack. He watched as the archers he had crushed moments ago were now reconstructing themselves. The blonde cursed as he moved to the side and avoided a large battle axe. As the axe moved towards him once more, he ducked under it and grabbed it. He then pulled it towards him, making the skeleton holding the axe fall on its face. He plunged his sword in the skeleton's skull and rolled out of the way as a hail of arrows hit the ground where he once stood. Naruto ran to a nearby pillar and hid behind it. He peered around it and saw the skeletons moving towards his location. His eyes widened as he saw skeletal arms shoot from the ground. More and more were being summoned. His eyes moved towards the large door they were defending. If he stood here to fight, he would only have to face endless waves. He moved his head out of the way as an arrow whizzed past him. Taking a deep breath, the blonde concentrated on his sword. Fire burst around the blade as Naruto stood back up and slammed the sword in the ground. A massive pillar of fire burst from his feet and shot out in a circle, burning down anything that it came in contact with. Smirking, the blonde stood back up and ran towards the door. He could hear the skeletons reconstructing behind him and more being summoned. As he reached the door, the blonde sheathed his sword and grabbed the handles. He started pulling with all his might, yet the doors didn't seem to budge at all. His eyes narrowed as he moved to the side. A large axe embalmed itself in the door. He grabbed the skeleton and slammed its head on the door until the skull cracked. He then threw the skeleton away and continued pulling the door. A loud creaking sound echoed in the chamber as the blonde felt the doors moving. With a victorious grin, he moved inside the next room and turned around. He grabbed the handles and pulled the doors, closing them behind him. He could hear arrows hit the door from the other side. "Who's there?" A voice resonated in the chamber. Naruto spun around. The room was smaller than the previous one. In the middle of the room was a large podium. To the side of the podium stood 8 pillars with 1 crystal each. In the far end of the podium stood a large statue holding a massive blade upside down in its right hand and a small chest in its left hand. A man stood in front of the statue, looking towards the blonde with curiosity. He was wearing a black robe with the design of a shark on its back, a gauntlet in each hand and a trident on his back. He had messy black hair and half of his face was burned. "Who are you?" the man demanded, pointing towards the blonde whose eyes narrowed. "I could ask you the same thing," he stated, taking a step forward. "What are you doing here?" "That is none of your concern. Now leave before I decide to wipe you from the face of the planet," he said with a growl as he turned around and moved towards the statue. "I think not," the blonde's voice echoed in the room, making the man stop in his tracks. "Step away from the artifacts," he growled as the man turned his head towards the blonde. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw the symbol on the man's neck. "Surprised?" the man inquired with a grin. "I feel generous today, so why don't you leave and forget you ever saw anything?" "Fat chance," he growled in reply as unsheathed his sword, the blade catching fire and making the man's eyes narrow. "You'd think I'd let a mage from Grimoire Heart leave this place with God knows what relic." "I see," The dark mage said slowly as he turned to face the blonde. "So you are Ignis Deus," he muttered to himself as the ground began to shake. Naruto fell on one knee trying to keep his balance. He looked towards his target with narrowed eyes, waiting to see what attack he would unleash. Water burst from under the blonde's feet, throwing him towards the ceiling. He gasped in surprise as he was slammed with the ceiling. As the geyser stopped spewing water, the blonde crashed on the ground gasping in pain. He rolled several feet and coughed a few times before getting back on his feet. He staggered on his feet. The world spun around him. He could hear the mage laugh at him. The ground shook one more time. Before the blonde could react, a large pillar of water slammed into him, sending him in the nearby wall. The wall cracked from the impact. He gasped in pain before falling on the ground face first. "Now stay there like a nice little mage and let me finish," the man said with a grin as he turned towards the statue. He walked in front of it and raised his hand towards its face. A beam of light shot from the statue's eyes, making contact with the mage's eyes. A purple pillar entangled the man and the statue as the blonde staggered back on his feet. He watched with worry as the crystals started shattering and the room began shaking. Chunks of rocks fell from the ceiling. Naruto rolled out of the way, barely dodging a piece of the ceiling. He looked up towards the pillar of light. It slowly died down, revealing the dark mage holding the statue's open chest in his hands. The man's laughter echoed all around him. The blonde grit his teeth. He couldn't let the mage take whatever was inside the chest. Finally, the way to Zeref's secrets. The mage yelled, making the blonde's eyes widen. Any mage wroth his salt knew the name Zeref, and the horrible things the dark mage did. His resolve to stop the dark mage had grown stronger upon hearing that. He jumped back on his feet and threw a fireball towards the dark mage. The man turned towards the incoming attack and jumped out of the way. The fireball crashed in the statue, shattering it, the blade falling on the ground. A wall of fire burst in front of the blonde as the dark mage responded to the blonde's attack. A stream of water connected with the wall. Steam started filling the room. Naruto jumped to the side and grabbed his sword. His defense had failed against the pillar of water. He dashed towards his opponent with his sword poised to strike. Water burst from the ground. The blonde mage dodged the attacks skillfully. Mere inches away from his target, a wall of water burst from the ground, making the blonde stop in his tracks. He began backtracking as tendrils shot from the wall towards him. He dodged the tendrils and cut those he couldn't dodge with his sword. Having enough, he summoned another wall of fire and stood behind it as the tendrils hit his defense. A spear made out of fire appeared in the blonde's left hand. He moved his arm back and then threw it towards the dark mage's general direction. The spear burst from the wall of fire, cutting down the water tendrils that got in its way. It then struck the water wall, piercing through it. The mage's attacks ceased as the wall dispersed itself in a pool of water. Naruto dismissed his fire and peered through the steam, trying to figure out if his attack hit the enemy. His guard was never down, however. Time and time again had proved to never let your guard down until you were certain that your enemy was dead. His eyes narrowed as he moved his body to the side. Several water spikes moved past the blonde, connecting with the wall. He looked towards the mage's location. Said mage burst from the steam with his trident in his hands. Naruto raised his sword and stopped the trident mere inches from his face. He growled as he pushed the mage back. He swung the blade towards the dark mage. A wall of fire shot towards him. The mage raised his trident up and then slammed it in the ground. Water burst from all around him, protecting him from the incoming attack. The fiery wall connected with the mage's defense, dispelling itself. The man grinned as he looked up towards the blonde and swung his trident towards him. The water shot towards its target, hitting the blonde that tried to deflect the attack with his sword. He was pushed back several feet. The ground began to shake as spike formed out of water shot from the puddles at the blonde's feet. Naruto jumped out of the way, avoiding the spikes and landing on the podium. He turned towards his enemy and summoned his fire. The fire then scattered in all directions and took the form of human archers. They raised their fiery bows and pointed them towards their master's enemy. The man looked around at all the targets and growled. Using his trident, he began shooting water bullets towards the archers, taking down a quarter of them before they even fired the fist salvo. The mage tried to defend himself from the arrows by summoning a dome of water. He was amazed when the arrows pierced through his defense, one of them nearly stabbing him in the head. He jumped out of the dome as more arrows crashed inside of it. He ran behind one of the pillars and took down the archer that could fire towards him. He summoned more pillars of water and launched them towards the blonde's location. Arrows shot from the remaining archers, piercing the pillar of water. They were unable to dispel it, however. Naruto raised his sword, the blade catching fire as he gazed towards the incoming attack. The blonde jumped forward and sliced the attack in half. The man's attack hit two stone pillars, taking them down. Naruto's eyes widened as he turned towards the pillars. He jumped out of the way, avoiding one of them, yet the second crashed on top of him. Laughter echoed in the room as the fire archers started vanishing. The dark mage moved out of his hiding spot and walked in the middle of the room. He looked towards the rubble and the dust lifting in the air and grinned. His eyes widened, however, as he saw something moving out of the dust-filled platform. Before he could even react, the blonde sword embedded itself in the dark mage's chest. With wide eyes he looked down at the sword and dropped his weapon on the ground. Moments later, footsteps echoed in the room. He looked up and saw the blonde walking down the stairs while holding his left arm. The blonde walked up to the dark mage and grabbed him by the throat. He saw the man trying to cast a spell. With narrowed eyes, the blonde proceeded to slam his enemy on the floor. The mage grunted in pain as his face connected with the floor. Naruto grabbed him by the collar and flung the mage in a nearby pillar. The pillar came crashing down on top of the mage. He slowly walked towards the rubble and began scavenging for the dark mage. He was amazed when he found the man still breathing. The fire mage grabbed the hilt of his sword and pulled it out of the man's chest. He yelled in pain as the blade was pulled out of his body. The mage opened his eyes and grinned at the blonde. Said blonde narrowed his eyes and lowered his blade in the mage's head, taking his life. "Fucking bastard," he grumbled as he clutched his injured arm. His eyes then landed on the small chest next to the dark mage's body. The blonde kneeled beside the body and carefully picked up the chest. He opened it and looked inside. His eyebrows rose as he took a piece of paper from inside the chest. He unrolled it and looked over it carefully. It was a map of Fury and a little bit of Bosco. The rest of the map seemed to have been ripped off. He wondered what the dark mage wanted with the map. What was the connection between this map and Zareth? The map had several designs on it. It was like the one that made the map tried to build the path towards something, to show the route towards something. He grumbled under his breath as he walked towards the door. It was time to pay a visit to the council. This isn't good, the blonde thought as he examined the piece of map once again. He was on a train bound for Magnolia. He didn't really know how to get in contact with the council and believed that if he asked the guild master he would tell him. From the moment he had stepped onto the train, he had tried to deduce what the map tried to portray or what it was trying to point to. There were two things that the blonde had managed to decipher. One was the location of Lullaby, and the other was the location of Endless Dream. There were arrows pointing from the tower he had been to towards the location of each dark artifact. The fact that the map portrayed the location of each artifact was bad enough, but the strange words written under the two artifacts' locations scared him more than ever. And with a song their souls shall come, the endless dream will restore the power of. The rest of the wording was ripped off. Probably the rest of it could be found on the other piece of the map. He didn't know much about the artifact called Endless Dream, but looking over the map the blonde could deduce that it was located in an island, near the coast of Kellam. He scratched his chin. Maybe it would be good to head towards Kellam and find the artifact before anyone else finds it, especially a dark mage. But then again, if there were dark mages there, trying to get the artifact, he wouldn't be able to stop them by himself. The temperature at that altitude would put a dent into his magic and weaken him at the same time. For this task he was sure he would need help. The closest artifact was Lullaby. The blonde had decided to head towards its location after talking with Makarov and find it, even take it from there as a precaution. The large doors of Fairy Tales Guild opened. All activity ceased as everyone looked towards the strange man standing in the door. Some recognized him as the man that had talked with Makarov about a week ago. Others looked at him strangely and carefully. Naruto looked around the place trying to spot Makarov, yet he could not see him anywhere. His eyes rested on a large decorated tooth in the middle on the guild. He smiled under his hood as he recognized Urza, who was standing next to the tooth. As he started walking towards the bar he could hear people whisper around him, asking who he was or what he was doing here. He grinned slightly. He liked the aura of mystery that he had for the moment. A hand appeared in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. The blonde looked towards the red-haired mage as she glared at him. Everyone stood still, waiting to see what would happen next. Suddenly the girl smiled as she walked forward and embraced the stranger, making everyone pull back in shock. The stranger then moved his arms around her and embraced her back, shocking them even more. What's going on here? Natsu's voice echoed through the silence as Gray looked incredulously at the sight. Is this not normal? A blonde-haired girl standing at the bar asked Mirajane. The white-haired mage shook her head, amazed at the sight. Urza is not that warm with people, she stated as she tried to figure out what she was missing out on. The redhead then pulled away from the newcomer and punched him in the chest. He bent down and grabbed his chest as he started laughing. Seriously, you could have said, "Hello," Urza stated as the man stood back up and shook his head. I had to take care of urgent business, but don't worry, it won't happen again, he told her as he walked past the redhead and towards the bar. Hey Mira-chan. Where is Makarov? He asked as he pulled his hood down revealing himself. The girl gasped as a smile appeared on her face and tears in her eyes. Naruto. She shouted as she jumped over the counter and embraced the blonde, the two of them falling on the ground with the blonde laughing. Naruto. A random voice shouted in the crowd. He's back? Another one shouted as Natsu jumped in the air cheering. Everyone was then cheering. Some had heard about Naruto, the fire mage. Others were there when he first arrived until the moment he left. Only one person looked at the scene curiously. The new member, Lucy Hartfilia, didn't know what was going on or who the blonde was. She watched with a smile though as everyone jumped to ask the blonde numerous questions and to greet him. She laughed as the blonde tried to pry Mirajane from him. The white-haired girl kept stating that if she let go he would leave again. When he did manage to free himself, Mira went on to explain to Lucy who Naruto was. The girl was shocked when he learned who he was. He was a legend, a living legend going by numerous nicknames. Though the most known one and most used was Ignis Deus. There was very little information on him. Fairy Tail never told the papers who he was or what he was doing during his travels. Ah, you must be the newest member. She heard the blonde speak. She looked up at him as she was standing on the seat next to her. Lucy smiled and nodded towards them as the blonde welcomed her to the guild. It was then that she noticed the eye patch. Naruto-san? She asked as the blonde smiled. Just Naruto please, he said with a chuckle as Mirajane brought him a drink. Ah sure, she replied before going back to her question. I couldn't help but notice the eye patch, she stated as the blonde stopped drinking and behind him Urza looked away. Hey, she's right, Natsu stated as he moved in front of Naruto. What's the deal with the eye patch? And those scars? He asked pointing towards the blonde. A hand then grabbed him by the collar and flung him away. Urza shook her head as she lowered her hand. Mirajane looked at the blonde as he lowered the cup. He looked towards her and then lowered his head knowing she would ask as well. Sorry, maybe some other time, he told them as he raised his head and smiled. Mirajane smiled back as the rest of the guild seemed to accept it. Oh yay, where is Makarov? Naruto asked as he looked around. Master is attending the annual meeting, was the reply he got. He frowned at that as he unconsciously moved his hand towards his pocket where the piece of the map was. Is it in the same place? He asked as the girl nodded and he stood up. You're leaving? Gray asked as the blonde nodded and moved his cowl over his head. I need to talk with Makarov, it's urgent, he said as he started walking away. He stopped after walking a few feet and turned towards the bar again. He walked back towards it and pulled a piece of paper of his hand pocket and handed it to Mirajane. The girl looked at it. The paper had an address written on it. The blonde leaned forward and whispered to her. Could you and Urza check that place for me? He asked with a smile. And whatever you do, don't tell Natsu or Gray about the location, he said as the girl nodded with a smile. The blonde grinned and pulled back. He looked towards Urza and smiled at her before turning around and walking towards the door. By the way Urza, Mira, you two are more beautiful than I remember, he said as he walked out the door with a large grin. If they were still the old Urza and Mira they would start fighting by now, or so he believed. If he had looked back he would have seen a different scene. What is it that you wish, mortal? A deep voice resonated throughout the landscape. Naruto looked down from the massive chunk of floating rock he was standing on and gulped. Underneath his feet there was nothing. There was a black abyss. He could see other floating rocks as well, but he felt that if he went down there he would be swallowed by the darkness. He looked up towards a massive rock. On it stood the Kyuubi, or at least he believed it was the fox. There was a throne of sorts on the rock. A figure sitting in on the throne. Fire moved around the figure constantly, shaping its form. 9 fiery tails moved around the throne from the figure's back, or so the blonde believed. The figure's face shimmered. Speak, I do not have all day, it commanded as the blonde narrowed his eyes. First of all, who are you? He asked pointing towards the figure. Where is Kyubi? What's this place? He continued asking. He knew how his mindscape looked like, it had never changed since his first encounter with Kyubi. The figure shimmered, it looked like it had moved on the throne. He might be here, or he may not, it replied as Naruto frowned. That was not the answer he was looking for. Then who are you? Are you Kyubi? He asked. He didn't have time to play games with the fox. I may, or may not, it replied once more, making the blonde twitch. He pointed his finger towards the figure and growled. Stop answering like that. Where the fuck are we? He asked. The figure did not reply at first, then its face shimmered and a grin appeared. This place is my domain. You called out to me. Remember? It asked as Naruto blinked owlishly. He didn't call out for anyone, not even Kyubi. He was on a train heading towards the location the guild master's annual meeting usually took place when he suddenly woke up here. You've always called on me, it continued as Naruto's eyes widened. Did that mean that he was talking with his own power? With the flames he constantly summoned? His eyes then narrowed. There was no way his power had a mind of its own. Stop playing games, Kyubi, he shouted at the figure that vanished from the throne. Fire moved around the rocks floating in the air as its voice echoed throughout the landscape. You came with a purpose, speak your mind, mortal, or leave this place. The voice commanded as the blonde started thinking, did he really come to this place seeking an answer? His eyes widened as he looked towards the sky. The map, he yelled as laughter echoed around him. Yes, you wanted to know of the map, I can help you. The voice said as the fire died down. The figure appeared in front of the blonde taking the shape of a man. His entire face was covered by a mask and a blindfold covering his eyes. He was wearing black plate armor, something similar to those of paladins. This made the blonde raise an eyebrow. You're definitely not the fox, he muttered as the figure laughed. It then looked towards the blonde and extended his arm. You want to know the meaning of the map, you want to know what it says, the man stated as Naruto kept quiet. He listened to the man and examined the hand. What was he expecting? I can offer you the answer, for a price. The blonde's eyes moved to the man's face, wondering what the price was. Don't listen to him, another voice shouted as the hand dropped next to the man's body. He took a step back as fire spewed in front of him, forming a shield in front of Naruto. The fire then started morphing as a pair of eyes appeared within the fire. Kyubi. Now the blonde was confused. Before him stood the fox, growling towards the man who seemed tense. The man took another step backwards before turning around and looking towards the blonde. The price for knowledge is a soul, he stated as Naruto's eyes widened. For each soul you get an answer, the powerful the soul, the more answers you get, he stated as he jumped down from the platform. Kyubi continued to growl even after the man had vanished. It then smelled the air and turned towards the blonde. Tread carefully with the Dark One. He is not bound by demon rules like I am. His words, everything he sprouts is a lie. Wait, what's going on here? Naruto asked, moving back. What trick are you trying to play now, fox? He demanded as the demon growled, its tails moving dangerously behind it. That was no trick, human, it roared, the rock shaking underneath their feet. That was one of the artifacts you carry, the fox stated, calming down. I made a pact and I will respect that pact, however. That thing has no honor whatsoever. Do not trust a word it says. It said as it started vanishing, the world around them crumbling and rays of light shining through the cracks appearing in the landscape. I warn you, stop your search else you bring destruction to both of us, were Kyubi's last words as the world completely vanished around Naruto. Naruto looked at the sealed scepter in his hands. It was sealed and yet he had this feeling it was related to the meeting he had a few hours ago. If he were to keep it on him for too long it would prove dangerous, yet he didn't know what to do with it. He could hide it somewhere, but the question was where would he hide it? He grumbled as he hid the scepter in his coat and looked out the window. He needed a place where the dark mages wouldn't look or even think of looking. No matter how much he pondered on this, he didn't know what to do. Then he remembered Kyubi's words. They didn't talk much, and if they did it was usually a one-sided talk with the fox telling the blonde what he had done wrong in the battles and how he could improve to increase their survivability chances. Usually the fox didn't interfere much and liked to keep to itself. This time, however, it was different. The tone in its voice made the blonde realize how bad the situation was and how much worse it could get. From what he knew, most of the artifacts that Zarif had created had a mind of their own or housed a demon. Lullaby was one such example. It housed a demon that devoured souls, unlike the scepter, which the blonde had yet to find out what it's called. It didn't give the user any power boost or anything like that. For Kyubi to say that the one housed within the scepter was fouler that itself brought more questions to the blonde and at the same time clarified something. Zarif really did create life out of nothing, yet that life wasn't bound by any rules. Kyubi was bound to the demon laws. In its own words, the fox had a code of honor that it followed. But still, the being within the scepter had an answer to the blonde's questions. It knew about Zarif's plans and more importantly, it knew about the map. Thinking about it, now he really thought like he was trying to make a deal with the devil himself. Back when he struck the deal with Kyubi for his eye, he felt like he was doing a deal with the devil. Thinking about that now, it seemed like that was nothing compared with what he was offered now. Bringing up the map, he looked at it and scowled. Was it worth it? Was it worth trying to make a deal with a being that had no honor? If he really went with what Kyubi said, he would only fall into a trap. He shook his head. Maybe this time it was better to go with the word of the fox. Maybe it was better to listen to the demon sealed within him. The train suddenly came to a screeching halt. Naruto looked out the window once more and saw the sign. Oshibana Station. He stood up and walked out on the platform. From the town Oshibana, he had planned to take a ride to Clover Town where the annual meeting took place. The town had no train station and the only way to reach it was by foot or by carriage, or magical transportation. The blonde pocketed the map and started walking away from the station. As he reached the exit, he locked eyes with a black-haired man that reminded the blonde of someone. He immediately looked away and dismissed the thought. The man, however, stopped walking and looked at the blonde's retreating figure, sweating slightly. "Don't tell me he's here," he yelled in his mind. "I need to warn the boss," he thought as he turned around and ran in the station. The blonde, however, was obvious to this as he looked around the square for a transport of sorts. His eyes landed on one of the magical vehicles. He walked up to the man sitting in the vehicle. "Excuse me," the blonde started as the man looked up from the newspaper. "I need to get to Clover Town," he said as the man nodded and closed the newspaper. He motioned for the blonde to get in. Moments later, the vehicle left with its destination being Clover Town. Two people watched as the vehicle left the town, one of them grinning like a madman. "Nothing to worry about, it seems," he stated as he turned around and started walking away. "We can begin with our plan." Naruto looked at the building in front of him. This was where the meeting took place. He took a deep breath. Apart from Makarov, he had never met any other guild master and he knew how strong each one of them were. He was just a child in comparison with them. Even Makarov would be able to wipe the floor with him if he desired to do so. Shaking slightly, the blonde walked forward and opened the door. The moment he stepped in, he thought he was at some sort of party. He expected the guild masters to be at a table discussing who knows what. Yet they seemed to be having a party of sorts. There were tables everywhere, neatly arranged with food and drinks already placed. People were chatting amongst themselves and laughing. He sighed. Sometimes he was amazed by the simplest things. "Oh, who is this?" a voice called out as a tall man walked towards the blonde. "And who might you be?" he inquired as the blonde bowed slightly. "I'm Ignis Deus. I'm here to see Master Makarov of Fairy Tale," the blonde stated as the man laughed softly. "You don't need to be so formal, come. Makarov is just getting over his shock," he said, motioning for the blonde to follow. "Shock?" he asked curiously as the man laughed once more and shook his head. Yet he didn't reply to the blonde's question. As they walked through the crowd, Naruto noticed people looking at him, smiling towards him and nodding in his direction. They knew who he was and it seemed like they respected him. It brought a small smile to the blonde. "Makarov, you have a visitor," the blonde's guide called out, drawing him back to the task at hand. Naruto looked in front of him and saw Makarov sitting on a chair and drinking a cup of water. He seemed deathly pale. Jii-san?" he asked. "Something wrong?" he inquired as the man looked up at the blonde and his color started to return to his face. He visibly relaxed a little bit. "Wrong. I just heard that Urza, Natsu and Gray formed a team," he shouted as the blonde scratched his cheek, not understanding what the problem was. Sure, he had heard that Natsu was a bit clumsy during missions and that Gray usually walked through towns, but Urza was with them, so that would mean she would keep them in check. "I still don't see what's wrong," he said as the man shook his head. Bob, of Blue Pegasus, laughed as he tried to calm his fellow guild master. Natsu and Gray are bad enough, boy. Makarov stated. Add Urza in that and it's horrible. Even she has her moments. Just think of the damage they could do to a town. I'd have the council on my nerve for weeks. He yelled out, flailing his arms around as the blonde laughed a little. I see what you mean, he stated as Makarov jumped down from the chair and moved past the blonde. Come on, we got to find them before it's too late, he called out only to be stopped by Naruto. Master, there is the matter of why I came here before that. That stopped the old man in his tracks. Only now did he realize that Naruto must have come to this place for a reason. I wish to meet the council. How do I get to Era? He asked as everyone in the room stiffened. Naruto looked around puzzled. Did he ask something wrong? For the rest of the guild masters the request was extremely strange. No one had ever wanted to seek out the council for an audience, especially not one from Fairy Tail, seeing as the council didn't like said guild very much. And yet the blonde before them wished an audience with the council. It was like he was trying to walk into a lion's den. Boy, Makarov started seriously. Why do you wish a meeting with the council? He wasn't dumb. There had to be a reason why Naruto wanted to meet them. He had read in the newspapers how he avoided every messenger the council had sent for him, how he tried to stay out of their reach. It's regarding an artifact I found in a tower here in Fury. At the mention of a tower everyone in the room tensed, though it went unnoticed by the blonde as he continued with his explanation. The one northwest of Magnolia, just 100 kilometers from Jura town. No one moved, everything was silent in the room. They knew of the tower, that blasted tower that had been under lockdown for many years with numerous royal guardsmen guarding the place. No one really knew what was in there and no one was allowed to venture inside. Those that had even a bit of knowledge of what was inside the tower had their memories erased about it. It was that dangerous. Boy, that tower, another guild master started as Naruto looked around. That tower belonged to Zeref's most loyal mages, Makarov stated, making the blonde's eyes widen at that. No one is allowed in there. How did you get inside? Why were you inside as a matter of fact? Another guild master shouted as the blonde straightened himself. I was sent there by the royal guard on a favor, he told them, making everyone's eyes widen at that. If you remember Jii-san, when I returned a week ago I told you I had a favor to do, he stated, looking towards the guild master. Knight Commander Klaus of Tazik asked me to check on the guards as he had not received word from them in quite some time. By the time I reached the place the guards were already dead. People started whispering among themselves at that, the idea that someone had killed the guards and infiltrated the tower. The term, dark guilds, resonated throughout the whispering. It seemed to the blonde that the guild masters were very wary of these guilds and even placed the blame on them in such matters. Who killed them? The old man asked. Naruto looked towards him and immediately replied. A mage of Grimoire Heart. Everyone tensed at his reply. Even Makarov took a step back in shock from what he heard. He was after an artifact that I wished to present to the council. Wait, you mean to tell me you took an artifact from the tower? And it's on you right now? Makarov shouted, his face losing color once more, and people around the blonde took a step back, who knew what the blonde was carrying on him, what kind of dark artifact he had on him. Are you insane, boy? He shouted one more as he began pacing around trying to calm himself. Master Makarov, with all due respect, the dark mage has been annihilated. Makarov looked at the blonde with wide eyes, respect evident in his eyes. Everyone looked at the blonde amazed. To have killed a dark mage from such a powerful guild was worthy of respect. The artifact he was trying to retrieve was a map. He stated as everyone blinked owlishly at that. Why would a dark mage be after a map of all things in that tower? A map? Someone questioned. Why a map? Everyone nodded and agreed with the question as Naruto moved his hand in his pocket and brought out the piece of the map. He unrolled it and showed it to everyone. They looked at it curiously. Some that could decipher it back away with horror written all over their face. From what I could decipher, this map shows the location of each dark artifact as well as a riddle of sorts as to what they all might be able to do, that I am not sure of. Naruto stated, his voice becoming lower with each word. That is why I need to see the council, this is a threat to all of us. He called out as people started to agree with him. If a dark mage got his hands on this, or has another piece of the map, we must act immediately. The boy is right. A guild master called out, stepping forward. He looked at the blonde with narrowed eyes. Unfortunately, reaching Era will take time. Your best solution is to head to Fiore's branch and meet them there. They are here? The blonde asked, not understanding. He always thought the council members were in Era. No boy, Makarov replied. They have special places like this in all countries so that they can get in contact with people faster. I will write a letter to the council requesting a meeting. The mage from before stated as he left, heading towards one of the nearby rooms. Naruto, come with me, Makarov stated as he started walking away. The blonde nodded and pocketed the map. He then proceeded to follow his guild master out of the building. First things first, we find those 3, 4 if you count Lucy, and then we head to the guild, Makarov stated. What about the council? We will wait for the message to reach them and for them to accept your request for a meeting. Makarov replied as the blonde sighed in annoyance. He didn't have time to wait. Maybe by now a dark mage was leaving another place with a deadly artifact in his hands. I know you don't like it, boy, Makarov continued. But some things just don't work the way you want them. Most of the council are a bunch of stuck-ups. You'll see when you meet them and most likely grow to hate them, he said, shaking his head as the blonde shrugged. As the two walked out of the place, they came across a heavily bandaged man. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he laid eyes on him. It seemed like he had met him before, but he wasn't sure about that. He then eyed the strange object in his hands, some sort of flute. The strangest thing about it was the skull, however. Would you like to listen to a song? The strange man asked as Makarov raised an eyebrow. The hospital doesn't let me play, he continued as the guild master thought about it for a second. Then he nodded at the request. Very well, but make it quick and then return to the hospital and heal up, he stated as the man laughed slightly and thanked the old guild master. He raised the flute and prepared to sign. It was then that the blonde realized what the flute was. He tensed as he prepared to attack, only to have something hit his right foot. Looking down, he saw Makarov's cane on his leg and the guild master looking towards him with a critical eye. The man shook his head slightly, making the blonde's eyes widen. Did he already know? With a soft sigh, the blonde complied and relaxed a bit. He waited to see what Makarov's plan was. He watched as the man struggled to play the flute. It seemed like he was having a debate inside his mind, if he should go on with whatever plan he had or not. The blonde relaxed as he saw the man crumbled. There was no more danger. Makarov shook his head as he began talking, telling the injured man about friendship and strength, the fact that he didn't need the flute for anything. The man looked scared throughout the old man's talk as he dropped the flute on the ground and collapsed on his knees, admitting his defeat. The blonde inwardly laughed at that. Never did he believe that a few words would make the enemy crumble on his knees. Master. The blonde turned to the direction of the sound and smiled as he saw Team Urza. Makarov, however, had a different reaction to everything. Why are you 3 here? He shouted as the color drained from his face for the 3rd time in one day. You're amazing. Your words touched me deeply, Urza called out as she grabbed the old man in a hug, his head slamming in her armor. She let go and looked up at the blonde, smiling with a small blush on her cheeks, remembering what he had said before leaving the guild yesterday. Naruto, why are you here? Why wouldn't I? He asked, laughing at her question. The girl giggled at his reply and shook her head. She looked towards him with a soft smile. The blonde's laughter suddenly died down as he tensed. You mages have no guts. A deep voice called out as smoke began rising from the flute. The blonde's eyes widened as he bit his lower lip. Shit, I didn't know the beings housed inside the artifacts could come out. The smoke began taking shape until a massive demon appeared in front of them. Let me consume your pitiful souls, it called out as fire appeared around the blonde. His eyes narrowed as he assumed a defensive position. Stand down, lullaby, Naruto ordered, making everyone look at him like he was insane. The demon turned towards him and grinned. It started laughing at the blonde and the order it was given. You order me around, pitiful mage? It inquired. You'll be my first meal then? The demon shouted as it opened its mouth, the song beginning to echo around them. While the majority brought their hands up to their ears to block the song, Team Urza charged forward. Before they could get close, however, a massive wall of fire burst in front of them, making them stop. The fire surrounded the demon, which stopped its attack and looked around itself. It can't be. You can't be the one they talked about, it muttered as it looked towards the blonde's general direction. Fire burst around the blonde, taking the shape of spears. He raised his hand and pointed towards the firewall. The spears turned towards the wall and shot forward. An ear-piercing howl echoed from the wall as numerous projectiles moved towards the blonde's location. He jumped to the side, avoiding the attack, and moved his open hand towards the firewall. He closed his hand in a fist, making the fire move towards the demon, constricting it. Another howl echoed as the demon was consumed by the flames. Before everyone's eyes, the demon began to evaporate until there was nothing left. The flames slowly died down until only the scorched ground could be seen. Weak, I've fought stronger, Naruto muttered to himself. The ones that did hear him looked towards him with wide eyes. Even Urza was impressed with how fast he dealt with the demon. I will take this, one of the guild masters stated as he picked up the flute. The council will want it most likely, he said as everyone agreed. Oi Naruto. The blonde turned towards the Dragon Slayer. That wasn't right. You stole our fight. He called out, glaring towards the blonde, who laughed at him. Oh come on, I hadn't had a fight for 3 days. The blonde replied as Natsu pointed a finger towards him. Then fight me. He challenged as the blonde blinked before bursting in laughter. Hey, what's so funny? Maybe another time, I've got work to do. The blonde replied as he turned towards the guild master. We should head back now, he stated as Makarov sighed and nodded, glad that the blonde had taken care of the demon and not Team Urza. He shivered, fearing what they might have done. Hey, wait. Natsu called out, running towards Naruto. Fight me, damn it, he called out, grabbing the blonde's head and trying to stop him, yet the blonde kept on walking like Natsu wasn't on his head. Naruto scratched his chin as he looked at the map. He was currently in the guild, alone. Everyone else was out looking at the match between Urza and Natsu. He decided to pass on the match, knowing what the outcome would be. He had been studying the map with Makarov ever since they got back, yet they couldn't decipher anything else. The map also had some false information, either that or Lullaby had been unsealed and then sealed somewhere else before. The location on the map that showed where Lullaby was located was wrong. The real place where the artifact had been sealed for quite some time was more to the north. This puzzled the blonde. Either someone knew where some artifacts were located and resealed them somewhere else, or the map was playing tricks on him. Why he believed the map was playing tricks with him was simple. Last night he noticed the location drawn for the tower was off by 5 degrees to the south. He was certain the map's tower location moved on the map, but he couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he tried. The map itself gave away no magical energy. It was just a piece of paper. But then there was the fact that the map now portrayed an island Naruto had never seen in his entire life. No maps ever showed it before. Before finding Lullaby, the island did not exist on the map, but now it was there all of a sudden. This made the blonde confused. His train of thoughts were shattered, however, as several outraged cries came from outside. Curious, he rolled the scroll and placed it back in his pocket. He stood up and walked out of the guild. Everyone was yelling towards someone. His eyes narrowed as he saw the Royal Guard flag. He moved through the crowd until he reached the front. His eyes widened as he saw Urza being taken away, her hands chained, by the Royal Guard. What is the meaning of this? He asked, yet no one replied or even spared a glance at him. He growled as he summoned his flames and opened a small portal. He moved his hand inside and took out a pike. The portal closed and the flames vanished. He then slammed the pike on the ground. Answer. He shouted as the frog-like man stopped and turned around with several guards. Their eyes widened as they saw the pike and flag belonging to Castle Tazik. The castle's emblem was a white wolf howling towards the moon. What? The man asked, surprised with seeing the flag. What is a member of Bosco's Royal Guard doing here? He asked. Naruto lowered the pike and summoned his flames again, recreating the portal. He placed the pike back inside and turned his attention to the man. I am not part of the Royal Guard. I am a member of Fairy Tail that fought alongside Knight Commander Klaus in his time of need, he stated, moving his hands behind. He started, only to have Naruto narrow his eyes at him as flames appeared behind him. The man gulped as he strengthened his resolve. Urza Scarlet has been placed under arrest by the council. I am to take her to them, he said, yet Naruto didn't budge, nor did his glare lessen. He then took a step forward. Then I will come with you. Everyone's eyes widened at that. What are you saying? A fellow guild member inquired. Naruto, you don't have to do this, Urza called out, yet the blonde took more steps forward. I have business with the council as it is. Besides, they've been wanting an audience with me for quite some time, he told them as he turned towards Makarov. We will return shortly, he stated as the man understood. He nodded, giving a small smile. The group began to depart when Natsu shot forward. Stop it, I won't let you take our friends. Natsu. Naruto called out, turning his head towards him and glaring. Trust me. Everything is all right. We will return. Don't do anything foolish, he said as his gaze softened. He smiled before turning around and continuing his walk with the royal guard. Naruto? Urza asked quietly as the blonde took a position next to her. What are you doing? She asked. I've been meaning to talk to the council. This is the best opportunity I have, and I'll make sure they release you no matter what. He growled as the girl looked at him shocked. She then smiled and looked down at the ground. Thank you, she mumbled. The blonde nodded in reply. Naruto looked around with mild interest. The building was large and fancy. The guards had left them as they entered the building. He was walking towards the chamber where the council waited with Urza and the messenger. It seemed like they had a lot of faith in this building's security that they left the blonde to walk around unchecked, especially near their prisoner. Trying to question the messenger proved futile. The man kept quiet about the council's wishes or why they wanted to arrest Urza. The blonde had been thinking up of reasons by now on how to clear her name of whatever charges they would give. They suddenly came to a halt as the messenger dropped on the ground in a low bow and Urza tensed. The blonde looked up curiously, wondering why they stopped. His eyes narrowed as he saw who it was, one of the council members, the younger ones. Sieglein, Urza mumbled, taking a step back. The blonde's eyes widened as he saw her shivering slightly. Long time no see, Urza, the councilman said with a small grin and then turned towards the blonde. And you too, Ignis Deus, or should I say, Naruto? He asked as the blonde tensed. His eyes then moved back to the girl. Oh, don't worry, this is not my real body, this is but a projection. The real me is in Era. His body then flickered a little, proving what he was saying. The girl visibly relaxed, yet the blonde tensed. He listened to the conversation. The councilman, Sieglein, told them how the rest of the members are also just projections. The blonde's eyes narrowed at the tone in his voice. While it didn't seem like he had any arrogance in his voice, there was something off about it. So they need a victim to place the blame on. The blonde heard, and then everything clicked in his mind. The master had been informed how they destroyed the train station in Oshibana. They needed to blame someone for the recklessness. His eyes narrowed as he saw Sieglein move closer to Urza and place his hand under her chin. He was whispering something to her, yet the blonde didn't care. He already reacted. His sword cut the projection in half, making Sieglein chuckle as he moved back. Don't worry, Naruto, I won't steal her from you, he mocked as he grinned towards the blonde. Said blonde moved in front of Urza and pointed his sword at the councilman's throat. Hurt her and I'll kill you, he threatened. While he was no expert in reading someone's lips, he knew how to read body language. He knew Urza was afraid of him. He wasn't going to back down from his promise. Killing a councilman would have you executed, Ignis, the man stated with a grin as he started vanishing. I will meet you beyond the doors. As the man vanished, the messenger stood up and began shouting at the blonde. The blonde grabbed him by the throat and threw him away, scowling at him. Naruto, thank you, he sighed as he calmed down. What did he want? He asked, not turning to look back at her, yet silence was his answer. With a sigh he moved to the side and placed his hand on her shoulder. Let's go, he said as they began walking once more. Moments later they entered the chamber where Urza was supposed to the trial. The girl looked at him and he smiled with a small nod. As the girl walked forward he looked up towards each councilman. He inwardly smiled as he saw Shito Yujima. Makarov told him that he could trust the old man. Said man smiled towards the blonde and nodded at him. We'll now start the mage trial. The blonde looked around. It seemed like they didn't mind him being there. They had been most likely informed already why he was here, or that he was coming. The blonde looked towards Sieglein. The man looked at the blonde and grinned. Defendant Urza Scarlet, please take the witness stand. A frog-like man said as Urza stepped forward and looked up at the council members. You are suspected of destroying part of Oshibana Station and Ryushika Canyon's railway bridge, the man said as Naruto took a step forward, making the man stop. The blonde walked up towards the booth, stopping next to Urza. Everyone looked at him strangely, yet one council member looked excited by the changes. Honorable Council, I know what you wish to do, yet I feel that placing these charges on her are unjustified, he stated as they started talking amongst each other. Naruto, Urza whispered harshly as the blonde glared towards her, making her keep quiet. You must understand, Ignis Deus, that the people need answers. We cannot just tell them that dark mages were in the town, probably planning to kill them. One of the members started as Naruto didn't move, yet listened carefully. It would have caused mass panic. Shito picked up. Rumors would spread and people would begin to believe that nowhere was safe, that the dark mages would possibly be around the corner waiting to strike. He stated in a sage-like voice, making Naruto shake his head. That is true, fear is ever present, the blonde said lowly. Yet, is there no way to create a fake truth? He asked as Shito sighed slightly. It's what I suggested, he thought. We could, but people had already seen too much and Miss Scarlet's proclamation at the station was more than enough to put the pieces together. He stated as the blonde looked at his friend with a raised eyebrow. The girl shrugged, muttering something along the lines that she didn't know their true plans back then and believing she would do more good than bad. The blonde sighed as he turned back to the council. Then, I ask that you place the charges on me, he told them with a serious face as everyone blinked. One of the women moved her glasses on her face, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. Very honorable Ignis, the head councilman stated in a booming voice. Yet people had seen Miss Scarlet. These are just accusations that she would have to carry on her shoulder. We will not lock her up or anything like that. Naruto sighed. There was no way to make them change their minds. He shook his head as he looked at the girl. Sorry, he mumbled as the girl smiled and reassured him it was all right. Then it is settled, the man said as Naruto sighed. Now, unless there is something you wanted to talk to us about? The man asked as Naruto looked up in confusion. Didn't you receive a letter from one of the guild masters? He asked as the man brought his hand up to his chin and began thinking. Ah yes, we did. We did not read it, however, as the matter of Lullaby got us worried, he said as he bowed a little. I apologize for not reading your letter. No need for that much respect, the blonde muttered as he began talking. Before I begin, I'd like Urza to be pardoned as this is a matter I cannot let others hear. He stated as they nodded and motioned for a guard to escort her out. The girl looked at Naruto, wondering what was so important that he needed privacy when talking with the council. The blonde waited until the doors closed before beginning his speech. The first thing he did as the doors closed was to pull out the map from his pocket. This honorable council is a map, he stated as they all leaned forward. The blonde showed them the map, yet he did not open it. This map was found in the tower that once belonged to Zerif's most loyal mages, here in Fury. He told them as they all tensed and began talking amongst each other. You all know of the Royal Guard Protection Treaty, he began once more. They nodded as the blonde continued with his speech. Knight Commander Klaus of Tazik, located in Bosco, hadn't received word from the men he sent to Fury to guard the tower for these 3 months. He was worried and asked me to take a look. Wait, Sieglein interrupted. Why didn't he just send word to us? He asked, leaning in his chair. The castle had been besieged, I am sure you heard of it. He stated as some of the members nodded, knowing about the incident. Some even knew of the blonde's involvement in helping the Royal Guard lift the siege. The least of his worries was to send out a message back then. For all he knew, the message from his men might have been intercepted. We understand that, Belno stated as she tapped her finger on the papers in front of her. What about the tower? Why do you carry an item from the tower? She asked. He took a deep breath as he looked up towards them with a serious face. The guards had been killed by a member of Grimoire Heart. As soon as he said that, everything stopped. A pen dropped on the floor. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed in the chamber. What? Belno asked, shaking at the news. Impossible, another one stated as the entire place started to turn into chaos. Please listen, the blonde shouted, drawing their attention. The mage is dead, I killed him, yet he was looking for this map. He showed it to them once more. The map shows the location of each dark artifact that Zerif had created, but this map, it's just a piece of the entire map. What are you saying? Leiji inquired with a shaky voice. This map, when completed, will show the location of each dark artifact that Zerif created. There seems to be a catch as well. There is a riddle or sorts written on the map. I couldn't decipher much, but from the little I could, it seems that all the artifacts, if brought together, might be catastrophic. He explained as everyone began mumbling between each other. Sieglein, however, narrowed his eyes towards the blonde as he brought his hands up in front of his face. The blonde lowered his hand and pocketed the map. We must reseal the artifacts, one of the councilmen shouted. But where do you want to seal them? Lullaby was found after all. This proved to the blonde that the artifact had been indeed sealed. His eyes widened as he realized the map had showed him the true location of Lullaby after defeating the artifact. Honorable council, he began once more, drawing their attention. Sealing them will do no good, he started as they all began murmuring. What do you mean? The map knows, it can track them it seems. He began to explain them what he had noticed with the map. They looked with horror at the blonde as he explained everything. This isn't good, the head council member stated slowly. We don't even know how many artifacts that man created. He said slowly, and the little we have. His voice died down as he shook his head. If I may, Naruto started once more. I could search for them, find a way to seal them somewhere and find a way to destroy the map. He started as everyone looked at each other and began nodding, agreeing with the blonde. How do you intend on doing that? Siegline asked as Naruto grinned in reply. I follow the map, find the rest of the map, gather everything I can find, seal them where no one can find them and throw the map in a volcano. He laughed at their faces. The plan seemed simple, too simple, but they all knew how hard it would be to actually find everything and seal everything away in different locations. It would be best if you gave them to us, and let us seal them, Siegline offered as the blonde shook his head. I feel that this is something I must do as I started. I already carry an artifact on me. It's my task to make sure no dark mage ever gets his or her hands on it. I agree with the boy, Shito said, standing up. He alone would be enough for this task. And yet, may I request help from other mages if I need it? The blonde asked as they all nodded. Now Ignis Deus, the head councilman, began. There is the matter of why we were searching for you, he began. For Urza it seemed like an eternity, waiting at the door for the blonde. It unnerved her as to what the blonde had to discuss in private with the council. To think that he wanted to have an audience with them, she bit her lower lip trying to figure out why he wanted to talk with them. Surely he wouldn't have requested for her to leave if it was just the reason as to why they had been searching for him for so long. She stood outside for an hour or more, waiting for the blonde to return. With each minute she became more impatient. Finally, after 2 hours, the doors opened and the blonde stepped out, alone. He closed the doors behind him and turned towards him with a big smile. Thank you for waiting, he said, taking a small bow and chuckling. What did you do in there? She asked as the blonde placed his hand on her back and motioned for her to go. She started walking with him next to her. Most of it is a secret that I cannot tell. It's regarding something I found during my travels, he said in a serious tone, making her even more interested. However, the other part, he chuckled. His chuckle then turned into laughter, making her even more confused. What? She asked. Don't laugh like that. Tell me already, she demanded with a pout as the blonde wiped away a tear from his eye. They extended an invitation to join the council, he said, making the girl stop in her tracks and gape at him like a fist. The blonde walked up to her and placed his hand under her chin. He moved his hand up, closing her mouth. A fly might enter, he said, laughing at her as she blushed in embarrassment. So, what did you say? She asked. It was common knowledge that the council, or most of it, hated fairy tale or had something against it due to the way it operated, or how some mages did. I accepted, though with a few terms of my own, he said with a smile. Fairy tale comes first. I am a mage of fairy tale first and then a council member. They agreed to that? She asked, amazed, as the blonde nodded with a grin. Yes, and I even get to leave my projection in Era and never step foot in there unless really needed, so I can spend time in the guild with my friends, he said with a big grin as he grabbed Urza in a hug, making her laugh at him. You are going to regret that decision. She laughed as the blonde looked at her strangely, and when he tried to pry answers from her, all she would do was laugh. It was only when they returned to the guild that he understood what she meant. The next day after he revealed that he was now a member of the council, Gray and Natsu came to him with crosses and garlic, stating he was tainted and that they would exorcise the demon from within him. The guild needed a new wall after that day. No, too easy, bad pay, too far away, the blonde grunted in frustration as he looked over the board. All the jobs listed on the board either had a bad pay, were too easy, or too far away from where Naruto wanted to go. His plan was to get a job close enough to the location of the tower pointed on the map, a sort of excuse for him to go and check the place out. Well? He heard Luxus call. The blonde spared a glance towards him and shook his head. I can see why you rarely take jobs. This is just humiliating, the blonde replied with a frown as the man grinned in reply. With a sigh, the blonde walked to one of the tables and sat down to think. A day had passed since the meeting with the council. Gray and Natsu had annoyed him the entire day up until the moment he couldn't take it anymore and sent them both flying through one of the guild's walls. Needless to say, Makarov wasn't pleased with the fact that the guild lost a wall. Naruto along with the two had been forced to rebuild it. How they did it in one night no one knew and most likely never find out. Several small thuds were heard making the blonde look up. He saw Luxus trying to keep himself awake and he could feel Mistgun's magic all over the place. He grinned as he stood up and walked over to the railing. He looked down at the guild. Everyone was asleep. Mistgun was scanning the board for a mission. "I see it still has no effect on you, Naruto," the man said in an eerie voice as the blonde chuckled. "And it will never have," he replied with a cocky grin as the man scoffed. "One day you will have to stop doing this." "Maybe," was the reply. Naruto didn't know even now why Mistgun kept putting everyone to sleep when returning to the guild to take another job. He tried numerous times to get answers out of him, yet the man kept silent. "Before you go," he started as Mistgun stopped walking. "Is there a connection between you and that guy's seat line?" he asked as the man stiffened for a second before replying. "None." And with that he walked towards the exit, leaving the blonde with even more unanswered questions. He moved away from the railing and took a seat at one of the tables just as the spell completely lifted from everyone. He blocked out the chaos that ensued after everyone woke up, opting to think of what possible connection the councilman might have with Mistgun. They looked the same, yet he knew they were two completely different people. That's why only the master knows his face. The blonde's eyebrows rose as he heard that. How could he forget about that? Maybe he could ask the man if there was a connection with the councilman. "No," replied Luxus, leaning over the railing. "I know it as well," he told them, taking a puff from the cigar he was smoking. "Luxus?" they shouted. Apparently they weren't expecting to see him here. "Mistgun is really shy. Don't question it too much," he replied with a smirk as the blonde chuckled. "Luxus. Fight me." And then he sighed as he heard Natsu call out. Sometimes he wondered why his friend wanted to fight with everyone in the guild, or at least all those that were higher in rank than him. Luxus grinned even more. "When you defeat Urza," he paused for a second. "No," he said, taking another pause. "When you defeat Naruto, I might consider it," he told the Dragon Slayer as he threw his cigar away. "Why you?" The man grinned as he pulled out another one and lit. "Come down here," Natsu called out as Naruto stood up and walked towards the railing. "Oi! Some are trying to think here," he shouted down, making everyone look up at him with wide eyes. "What are you doing up there?" Gray called out as the blonde shrugged in reply. "Hey! How come Naruto gets to go to the second floor?" Luxus laughed at Natsu and the question. "I thought it was obvious. Only S-class mages can come up here," he shouted down. The pink-haired boy growled as he started running towards the stairs, only to have a large fist smash down on him, stopping him in his tracks. "You aren't allowed to go up yet, Natsu," Makarov stated as he looked up towards his grandson. "And you, Luxus, stop taunting him," he said as the mage in question shrugged and walked back to his seat. "But, Naruto," the Dragon Slayer started, only for Makarov to shake his head. "Considering everything he's done for the past years and the renown he has, I think S-class is more than suited for him," Makarov told the boy as he moved his hand away. "So, how strong is Naruto then?" Lucy inquired as everyone started asking themselves the same question. The blonde, however, stood quiet, opting to look and see what happens next. "I say he's stronger than Luxus," Happy chimed in as the blonde's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Unfortunately," said Mage heard the comment and stood up. He walked back towards the railing and glared at the cat. "Stronger than me?" he asked with narrowed eyes as he looked towards the blonde. The blonde mage was taken aback by the look in his eyes. "Ha! No one is stronger than me," he shouted at everyone. "You better get this through your heads. I'm the strongest here, not Urza, not Mistgun, not that geezer, and especially not Blondie here." The fire mage watched as his colleague walked back to his seat with a scowl on his face. Naruto scratched his chin as he moved towards the table Luxus was sitting at. The man looked up towards the blonde and glared slightly as he took a seat at the table. They stood in silence, looking at each other, staring at each other. Finally, Naruto broke the silence. "So, what was that outburst back there about?" he asked, leaning in the chair. Luxus raised an eyebrow at the question before scowling. "You heard it, didn't you?" he replied as the fire mage shrugged nonchalantly, making his blonde colleague glare back at him. I couldn't care less who the strongest person in Fairy Tale is, he replied as the man raised an eyebrow not understanding. What I want to know is what happened to you, he replied making Luxus blink in confusion. Explain, he demanded as Naruto sighed and shook his head. That outburst, I didn't expect that kind of outburst from you of all people. What happened while I was gone? He asked as the mage closed his eyes and sighed. He shook his head and leaned back in his chair before opening his eyes and glaring at the blonde. That is none of your concern, he growled out as Naruto's eyes narrowed at the reply. I'm afraid it is. You are a friend, like it or not. And what if I tomorrow decide to stab you in the back? He asked with a grin as Naruto's eyes widened. It was like he really meant it. Still, he steeled himself and glared back. I'd stop you, he replied as a smirk appeared on his friend's face. Will that be enough? He asked making the blonde grind his teeth in annoyance. He didn't know where this was going or what Luxus was trying to prove. He shook his head as he stood up. Hopefully, he replied to the question turning around and walking away. I'd hate to kill one of Fairy Tale, he whispered to himself, yet loud enough for Luxus to hear. The mage stood in his seat looking at the blonde's retreating figure. He moved his hand up to his cigar taking it out of his mouth. He shook his head as a sigh escaped his lips. Naruto sighed sadly as he thought back about his little conversation with Luxus. Out of all the people he knew of in the guild, before he left, Luxus had changed the most and his change wasn't a good one in his opinion. The man used to be a great person, helping out all those in the guild. He cared about them even though he never said so in public. The blonde silently cursed. Now he had something else to figure out, why Luxus had changed like this. The blonde looked up as he reached the edge of Magnolia. He could see his place in the distance. A small smile appeared on his face. It took half of his entire wealth to buy the terrain and then build the thing, but he was proud of what he had as a home. It was a medium-sized mansion similar to the ones nobles had. A tower had been built, as per Naruto's instructions, within the mansion, making it part of the entire place. It had 3 floors. 6 if you took into consideration the attic and the 2 additional floors on the tower. A medium-sized staircase leading towards the entrance from the garden and a balcony on the 2nd floor, on top of the entrance. In front of the mansion, in the middle of the garden, he had ordered them to build a small square with a fountain. He had personally come to Magnolia on the day the mansion had been completed and the fountain as well to engrave the name of his mother on the stone at the statue's feet. The statue itself was nothing out of the ordinary, an angel in kneeling position, as if praying. It didn't take long for the blonde to reach his home. The entire place was surrounded by a thick stone wall with a gate. The blonde pushed the gate open and stepped inside, closing it behind him. He smiled as the few workers he had hired to tend to the garden greeted him. He nodded towards them and greeted them back. The blonde continued his walk, looking around and inspecting the place. Everything was neatly arranged and taken care of. He came to a halt as he spotted Mirajane in front of the fountain. The girl turned around and blinked as she saw the blonde standing there. She smiled and turned to face him. You have a nice place here, Naruto, she said looking towards the mansion one more time. Hey, thanks, the blonde replied walking up towards her and stopping next to her. The girl turned to face the fountain once more and looked at the name engraved at the bottom. Don't worry, I change, he said looking down at the plate as well, but I wanted to give her something. She smiled at that and nodded. You really loved her, the blonde chuckled in reply and nodded. Is Ursa here too? He asked after a moment of silence. The girl nodded with her smile still present. We didn't get to visit this place when you asked us, so we came today, she told the blonde who nodded. He wanted them to be the first to see it as they had been the first friends he made in Fairy Tale when he arrived in this world. Makarov already knew of the place as he came from time to inspect it while he was gone. Mistgun asked the old guild master as a favor. The man didn't know until a few days ago to whom the place belonged to. The old man was surprised to find out it belonged to none other than Naruto. Is everything all right at the guild? Mirajane inquired. Her friend nodded as he looked towards her. Mistgun paid us a visit today, he said making the girl giggle knowing that the man would have put the entire guild to sleep just for a visit. Then Luxus had an outburst. He told her with a sigh as she smiled sadly and shook her head. About him being the strongest, she asked making the blonde nod and look at her curiously. He said that before, about 2 years ago, she told him growing silent. Naruto placed his hand on her shoulder drawing her attention. It's all right, he told her. He knew why she stopped so abruptly when mentioning that fact from 2 years ago. Her sister had died 2 years ago after all. He could see that it still pained her to think about it. How do you? She started only for Naruto to shake his head. I was there on that day, with Mist, he replied to her question, making her eyes widen. I'm sorry I didn't approach you guys on that day, but I felt I would have done more damage than good. He had been there for the funeral, staying in the background with Mistgun. No matter how much it pained him to just sit back and watch his friends suffer, he couldn't bring himself to appear before them. After the funeral he would have left. It would have hurt them even more if he told them or when he left. So he opted to keep quiet and watch from afar. Mirajan seemed to understand this as she gave a small smile and nodded, embracing the blonde and trying to hold her tears back. They stood in silence for several minutes before she pulled away from the blonde, wiping the stray tears away from her eyes. She then rummaged through her pockets and took out a small package, handing it to the blonde. He looked at it curiously but accepted it nonetheless. As he was about to open it, Mirajan placed her hands on his, drawing his attention. She shook her head at him. Don't open it now, she said as she took her hands away. Why don't you find Urza? She's somewhere inside, she said as the blonde frowned slightly. What about you? He asked as she gave him a small smile. Don't worry about me, I still have a lot to explore here, she replied, giggling as Naruto shook his head. He smiled and nodded as he pocketed the small gift and walked towards the entrance. Mirajan looked at his retreating form, her smile dropping slightly as she then looked down at the ground. You'd better take care of him, Urza-chan, she thought as she turned around and walked towards the garden, continuing her exploration of the area. As Naruto stepped inside the mansion, he was greeted by a man in his early 60s dressed in butler uniform. The man smiled at the blonde as he greeted him. Welcome back, master, he said as he handed the blonde a scroll. The council sent this. Already? Naruto asked with a frown as he opened the scroll and skimmed through it. He shook his head as he rolled it back and handed it to the butler. Not important? The man inquired as Naruto shook his head. Do you know where Urza is? The man thought for a second before smiling and nodding. Miss Scarlet is on the top floor. I believe she said she wanted to see the tower, he replied as Naruto nodded and began walking towards the stairs. And Master Naruto? The butler began, making the fire mage stop and look at him. Mr. Mistgun left you a package in the study. Thank you, Alfred. Naruto replied as he turned around and continued walking up the stairs. Naruto inspected the place as he walked up the stairs to the last floor. The walls were painted white, several paintings adorned the walls. The majority were painted by him during his travels. Starting from the first floor and to the last floor he had placed all the paintings. He wondered what people would think if they saw them. As he reached the last floor he turned to the left and made his way to the next set of stairs that lead towards the tower. The large door that the blonde usually locked was now open. The stairs could be seen behind it. The stairs were made in spiral. There were a total of 50 stairs until the first floor of the tower. The tower had a total of 2 floors. The first was used by the blonde as a recreation area where he could think in quiet. The second had an alchemy lab where he experimented with different potions and herbs, mixing them and trying to create different compounds. He had yet to use any of them. Everything he created was usually sold. He walked up to the second floor, seeing as the girl wasn't on the first. He found Urza examining the alchemy table and several elixirs he had been working on with great interest. The girl turned her head slightly towards him and nodded, acknowledging his presence. Naruto chuckled. No, hello, he asked as she turned around to face the table once more and smiled. I didn't know you brewed potions and elixirs, she stated with a hint of admiration in her voice. The blonde walked next to her and picked up a large vial from the table that she had been eyeing. What exactly do you brew? She inquired. Elixirs that can strengthen you, give your magic a significant boost, potions that can heal you, stuff like that, he replied as he shook the vial before placing it back on the table. I'll have to start from scratch again on that one, he whispered to himself. What's bad about that one? She asked him as she took the vial in her hands and inspected it. It was meant to be a sleep potion, yet it turned to be poison, he replied with a frown as she looked towards him with surprise. No, I don't brew poisons. Well, not always. He chuckled as she frowned. What? Don't tell me you've never coated your swords with poison, he said with a deadpanned expression as she shook her head. You and I both know we aren't supposed to kill, she lectured him before placing the vial back on the table. I don't brew that kind of poison, he said sternly, his eyes narrowed as if he had been insulted. Paralyzing poison, sleep poison, nothing deadly, he told her, crossing his arms over his chest and making Urza look away embarrassed. As for killing, you have no idea how deep my hands are in blood, he thought. You have a nice place, she stated after a moment of silence, making the blonde smile. Must have cost a fortune, she looked at him in the eyes, making the mage grin at her. It did. Took over half of my entire money to buy the land and then build this from scratch, he told her as he walked towards a window and looked at the garden down below. I wanted a place like this, where I can come and relax. The guild not as relaxing as it used to be? She inquired, walking next to the blonde, giggling slightly as she asked the question. It's fun, but you can't expect me to sleep there or live my whole life, he replied, not looking away from the window. Even you, Mira, and the rest have your own place, he continued, sparing a glance in her direction. She smiled as she nodded once. She then turned towards the blonde and moved closer. Naruto looked at her curiously. He turned to face her as she inched closer and placed her hands on his chest. Naruto felt his heart beat faster at her actions. He nervously moved his hands up and placed them around her waist. Urza's smile widened at his action, making the blonde's heart beat even faster. His brain had shut down. Everything seemed natural now. She slowly inched closer towards him. He relaxed as he closed his eyes and moved closer as well. Naruto, Urza-chan. Their eyes snapped open as they heard Myra's voice echo through the stairs. They looked at each other and jumped away as the girl appeared on the second floor of the tower. There you are. We should head back. Master is probably wondering where we went, she said as Urza nodded and looked towards the blonde. I'll see you tomorrow, Naruto, the girl stated as she turned around and started walking down the stairs. Come soon, Mira cheerfully added as she walked up to the blonde and gave him a peck on the cheek. She then turned around and walked down the stairs, following her redhead friend. Naruto stood watching the stairs for several minutes as he processed what had happened. He looked down at the ground, grabbing his chest, wondering what that was. He closed his eyes and sighed, letting a small smile appear on his face as well. Naruto watched the fire crackle in the fireplace. His mind was filled with numerous questions to which he had no answers. He looked at the letter in front of him, on the table. It was the same letter from the council. His butler brought it back to him and insisted that he read it, but no matter how many times he went through it, he couldn't understand what the councilman that wrote the letter wanted. Everything on it was just gibberish. He had tried to make contact with the councilman with the use of his image and aura, yet he had no such luck. The man didn't seem like he wanted to talk and acted as if he hadn't sent the letter in the first place. It confused the blonde. His reactions were genuine. He was genuinely surprised to hear that he had written a letter of sorts and sent it to the blonde. With a sigh, the blonde picked up the letter again and threw it away on a large pile of papers. He then picked up the small package Mirajane had given him. He had forgotten about it last night. Carefully, he unwrapped it. A small box was now in his hands. He studied the box with interest as he opened it. He turned it upside down and let the content drop in his palm. His eyes widened at what he saw. In his hand stood the memento that had been broken years ago, a day before he had left the guild. A small piece of paper was attached to it. He unwrapped it and read the contents, his eyes widening even further as a small smile appeared on his lips. Master Naruto. The mage turned his head to the side and nodded to the old butler. I believe it's time, he stated as Naruto looked towards the fireplace. Tell me why you insisted on serving me, he asked as the man smiled. You've done my family a lot, helped us a lot, it seems only logical that I help you, he replied as he placed a cup on the table in front of the blonde. Said blonde smiled as he picked the cup up and sipped its contents. A pleased sigh escaped his lips as he leaned into the couch. Master, the butler said again as the blonde's eyes snapped open. Damn, I forgot. He stood up and placed the cup on the table. He motioned for Alfred to follow him. The two left the room and walked through the hallway, going down the stairs until reaching a large metal door at the end of the corridor in the basement. Naruto took out a key and opened the door. They stepped inside and continued walking. The scenery changed as they went through the door. It was like they had stepped into a cave. The temperature began to rise as well with each step they took. Moments later they appeared in a large round room, with a pit in the middle. Alfred stopped walking, letting the blonde move forward until he reached the end where he came to a halt. Flames shot upwards, creating the form of the elemental. It stood in front of the blonde fire mage. It then bowed towards its master. "I've completed what you asked of me." Its voice echoed throughout the chamber as fire shot up in between them. "Take it," it commanded as the blonde took a step forward and extended his hand towards the flames. His hand moved through the flames until he felt something. He grabbed what was inside the flames and pulled it. Slowly, his sword emerged from the flames, yet it looked different now. The blade was longer, sharper, and fire constantly traversed through paths created on the blade. The leather hilt had flames sprouting out of it, slowly moving around the blonde's hand as if dancing. "The sword has been strengthened as you wished, master," the elemental stated as Naruto twirled it around for a few moments before looking up at his summon. "Its powers have increased, it's able to use more fire-based attacks now." "What about the previous requirements?" he asked, moving his finger on the blade. "Nullified, to a certain extent," it replied, making Naruto look at it curiously. "I've given the blade my power. The flames that you see moving through it are mine." Naruto looked at the blade, now understanding what the flames were. Each time you use a spell, a small part of the flames will vanish. It would require quite an attack to completely drain it. "What happens if I do drain its powers?" he asked, sheathing the sword. "Return to me and I shall restore its powers," the elemental stated. Naruto nodded at it. Inferno bowed before him before submerging in the lava underneath it. The blonde fire mage turned around and sighed as he walked past his butler. The man turned around and followed his master as he left the elemental's chamber. "It still amazes me every time I see him," Alfred said as the blonde closed the door behind them and locked it. "He is something," Naruto replied, pocketing the key and walking towards the stairs. "I'm surprised, however, that he managed to strengthen my sword so much. The power I felt when I grabbed it, it was breathtaking," he admitted as he paused for a second while climbing the stairs. He shook his head, continuing what he was doing. "Naruto." The blonde looked up as he heard his name called. He looked towards the end of the hallway. At the door, Urza stood there with a serious expression on her face. "Urza?" he asked, surprised as Alfred excused himself and left. "What are you doing here?" "Master wants us to go after Natsu, Happy, Lucy and Gray," she explained. "Come, there is no time." The blonde blinked as she turned around and walked out the door through which she had come. He shook his head as he ran towards her. "Alfred, take care of the place. I'm leaving for some time," he called out as he closed the door behind him. He looked around, trying to find where his redhead friend was now. He saw her moving towards the gate at a quickened pace. "Hey! Wait up!" he shouted, running after her. The girl, however, didn't stop. She continued walking, making the blonde in order to reach her. "What's the hurry?" he asked. "What happened?" "GCH, she started." She was clearly pissed off. Natsu had Happy steal a S-rank job yesterday. His eyes widened at that. "They left with Lucy. Master sent Gray to bring them back, but he has yet to return. He wants us to drag them back." Naruto paused for a second as he thought he saw flames appear behind her. She was definitely angered by this. "Okay," he said carefully as he moved next to her. "Wait, do you have any plan?" he asked as the girl turned towards him and glared. He backed away with a nervous laugh. Maybe it was better to let her lead this time. Urza's eyebrows twitched in anger. The captain of the pirate ship she had commandeered was laying on the floor shivering like a baby. That was not what angered her, however. She had sent the blonde to tend to the crew, to make them work faster so that they would reach Galuna faster. Yet, she started to doubt the blonde was doing what she had told him to. The ship was moving slower and the racket from outside wasn't helping at all. She could barely think. With an angry sigh, she stood up and walked towards the door, slamming it open. She walked through the hallway until she reached the deck. Her eyes widened at what she was seeing. Bottles of rum were laying all over the deck, with crew members laying in a pool of their own drool or rum, unconscious or barely conscious. She grit her teeth, wondering what had happened. Urza looked around, trying to spot the blonde. Her eyes widened as she saw the blonde sitting next to a large barrel on the other end of the deck. 10 pirates were all around him. She walked closer, her eyes widening even further at what she was seeing. There were 6 cups next to 3 pirates, all of them filled with rum, empty bottles of rum all around them, and a small ball in front of the blonde. "All right," Naruto slurred out as he grabbed the ball. "Get ready." He took a pause as he hiccuped, "to lose." He threw the ball towards the cups, missing them all and making one fall on the ground. The pirates laughed at him as he glared towards them. "Drink." They all shouted as Naruto grabbed a bottle of rum and opened it. He looked at it with a stupid smile on his face as the others chanted for him to drink. He then turned it upside down in his mouth and began to drink away the contents. As the last drop fell from the bottle, he threw it away and gasped. "Woo!" They all shouted as Naruto raised his hands in the air and began to bow at them as they cheered. Urza's eyebrows twitched as she saw all that. She stomped over to the blonde, gaining his attention.
"Oh hey there," he said, falling on his face. He moved his head so that he could see her again. "Why don't you join us, cutie?" he asked, chuckling and hiccuping at the same time.
"Naruto," Urza began in a low voice as the blonde jumped on his feet. His body moved around as he tried to gain his balance. "That's my name," he shouted with a large smile. His smile suddenly dropped as he lost his balance and fell forward, crashing on top of the girl.
Urza blushed as she realized their position. She then growled as the stench reached her nose. "Oi, why is this place moving so much?" she heard him ask. "I think I'm going to be sick," he said, slowly, making her eyes widen in fear.
A shriek echoed on the sea, reaching the shores of Fury and making fishermen look towards the horizon, wondering what they had heard. "You will wait here." The three pirates nodded while holding to each other and trembling in fear at the armored mage in front of them. Beside her stood her companion, Barely. They knew better than to cross her. What she told the captain was frightening. The warning she left him with if he dared to leave made everyone pale.
The girl glared towards them one last time before turning around and moving towards the smoke in the distance. Her companion dropped on his knees and clutched his stomach, couching several times. "Why did I drink?" he asked himself as he tried to keep his stomach from spilling out on the sand. She didn't reply, only spared a glacé towards him before turning around and continuing her walk. The male bowed his head in shame. Maybe he went a bit overboard, but just standing there and playing the role of an overseer wasn't his style.
With a sigh, he stood up and started walking away, trying to catch up with his red-haired friend. The ground shook for a moment, making him lose his balance and fall on the ground face first. He grumbled under his breath before standing back up on his feet. He looked up towards the sky. "Now I've seen everything," he said to himself as he saw the giant rat flying in the sky. The blonde rubbed his eyes and looked back up. The rat was still there. He moved his hand in one of his pockets and took out a bottle of rum. He looked down at it with a deadpanned expression. "Definitely the last time I drink," he muttered as he threw the bottle away and stood back up.
"Urza," he called out. No reply came, making him sigh. "Come on, are you still angry?" he shouted, and once more silence greeted him. He sighed and shook his head as he closed his eye and concentrated. He could feel large concentrations of magic in 3 different locations. The closest one was in the same direction Urza went.
The blonde's eye opened as he moved forward, leaning against the trees each time he felt like he was losing his balance. A strange sensation washed over him as he walked through the forest. He stopped for a second and looked around. He dismissed the sensation as he couldn't see anything or feel anything around him.
Lucy didn't know which was worst, fighting against an enemy that could control the spirits you summoned, or having to face her rescuer. Looking in Urza's eyes, she could only go with the latter. Having to be dragged back to Fairy Tale by Urza was not something she had planned on.
The blonde looked towards the fire mage, as if pleading him to save her from the red-haired girl's clutches, yet the mage seemed like he was on a leash as well. One look from Urza made him back away with a nervous look. Lucy looked down at the ground dejectedly. This wasn't going well. Still, maybe there was some way out of this mess. "Urza, listen," she called out. The girl turned towards her with a glare that promised pain, lots of pain. She gulped as she scratched the back of her head nervously. "Lucy, are you safe?" They heard Happy's voice. Naruto tried to warn the cat to turn tail and run, but it was too late. By the time Happy realized who was with Lucy, it was too late. Urza had him in her grasp, holding the cat by his tail. "Where's Natsu?" she asked, not sparing a glance towards the cat. The blonde fire mage sighed as he walked next to Urza. "This wouldn't have happened if you didn't steal that job," he mumbled loud enough for Happy to hear. The cat lowered its head in shame. "Listen to me," Lucy called, drawing both mages' attention. "I apologize for selfishly coming here, but this island is currently in a grave condition," she shouted. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that as he looked towards his companion with the corner of his eye. She didn't seem fazed by what the girl stated. "There are some people who are trying to revive a frozen devil," Lucy continued. while Urza still didn't seem fazed by the news Naruto did. He visibly stiffened at the news as he moved his hand towards his sword's hilt. We want to save this island somehow, he heard her conclude. He didn't really care what the other reasons were at that point. The news of a demon and people trying to revive it was more than enough to gain the blonde's interest and approval in continuing the mission. To some extent at least. I'm not interested. Their eyes widened as they heard Urza say that. The fire mage turned towards her with a shocked expression on his face, his mind not comprehending what she had just said. Then, at least let us finish the job to the end. She was cut off as the tip of Urza's sword reached her neck. She gulped as she took a step back, the red-haired girl's glare hardened. Job? No. You guys betrayed the master, don't assume you can get away with it just like that, she told her. We will get Natsu and Gray, and then leave this place, she ordered. A hand appeared on her blade, her eyes moved towards the blonde next to her as he pushed the blade down. Leave? He asked as he made eye contact with her. The girl glared towards him.
Yes, leave, we came to retrieve them, she stated as Naruto turned his body around, facing her. He glared towards Urza as he crossed his arms over his chest.
Did you not hear what she just said? He inquired as she glared back towards him. Did you not hear what I said? She retorted as Lucy and Happy looked at the two as they argued about the information she had given them. There is a devil on this island, who knows how powerful, you're going to just turn and walk away? He asked in anger. What if they actually revive it? Do you have any idea what might happen? The girl didn't flinch nor did she give any signs of changing her opinion. No, I don't, but that is not our mission, now stand down, she ordered as the blonde's eye narrowed.
Stand down, he asked slowly as he grit his teeth. No, Urza, I will not stand down, he shouted, making her eyes widen. While I do agree this is not a mission for them, this is a matter I just cannot ignore.
Are you going to go against what Master said? She asked slowly, her eyes darkening as the blonde crossed his arms over his chest once more.
If that's what it takes to stay here and finish the job, he paused as he looked towards the mountain. Then yes. He finished, looking back towards the red-haired mage.
The girl bit her lip as she looked away in anger. She turned to berate him only to realize the blonde had started leaving already. Keep this in mind, sometimes you must break certain rules to ensure people's safety, he stated as he vanished in the forest, leaving the fuming girl behind. Urza clenched her fists as she turned to face Lucy and Happy, scaring them as they saw the murderous look in her eyes. Where is Gray? She demanded as Lucy gulped and Happy moved behind the blonde girl in fear. The blonde fire mage swung his sword in anger, cutting the forest foliage out of his way.
His mind couldn't comprehend why Urza would just back down when something such as a devil or demon threatened to be unleashed upon the world. Wasn't it their job to help people first and foremost? Sure, Makarov told them to retrieve the mages that took the S-class job without his knowledge, but that didn't mean they couldn't stay for a few more hours or a day to stop a summoning ritual or whatever was going on here. Naruto stopped as he bent forward and grabbed his stomach, his head started throbbing and he felt sick. He was having problems seeing normally due to the large amount of alcohol in his system. He grit his teeth. Today was a bad day, he couldn't fight like this. He needed to find Natsu and Gray, or at least one of them, and have them help him with this matter, before Urza found them and took them back to the guild.
His eyes widened as he felt the ground begin to shake. He looked up towards the mountain in wonder. His eyes widened even further as he saw the mountain move, falling down on one side. A smile appeared on his face, knowing who might be responsible for that. It also let the blonde know where to go now. With a chuckle, he stood up and began running towards the mountain. After a few steps, the blonde began to stagger once more. I don't have time for this, he muttered to himself as flames shot around him. They moved closer to him until they consumed him. Finally, a large flame shot towards the sky, making its way towards the mountain. As it reached the base of the mountain, the flame crashed in the ground and dispelled itself. Naruto stood on the scorched ground, panting slightly. He looked up and, with much effort, stood back on his feet. A hand suddenly grabbed him and helped him stand up. The fire mage looked to his side. Gray? He asked as his friend kept staring at the entrance. Please let me handle this fight, he stated, making the blonde chuckle. I'm not fit for a fight, I'm just going to play the role of a support today. The dark-haired mage didn't seem to hear what the blonde said as he moved forward, entering the temple. Naruto shook his head as he rubbed his eye and started moving. Upon reaching the entrance, he placed his hand on the wall and looked around, impressed by the ancient structure. His eyes widened as the ground began to shake. He felt the temple tilt to the right. Losing his balance, he fell on one knee and waited for the shaking to end. As soon as it ended, he stood back up and moved inside the temple. "Get back here!" The blonde's head snapped up as he heard the familiar voice echo through the temple hallways. His eyes narrowed as he started running through the hallway. He could hear Natsu's demands echo all around him. It was hard to pinpoint his exact location.
Finally, he came to a large chamber. Looking around, the blonde spotted the Dragon Slayer and an unknown person in the middle of said chamber. His eyes widened as he saw the person vanish in thin air.
"Oi! Where are you?" The Dragon Slayer shouted as he looked around frantically. His eyes rested on the blonde as he blinked. "Naruto? What are you doing here?" he inquired as the blonde walked up towards his friend. As he reached Natsu, he smiled and then scowled as he slapped the backside of his head. "Idiot," the blonde muttered as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Hey, what was that for?" the Dragon Slayer shouted as Naruto shrugged nonchalantly and looked away.
"Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's related to the fact that you stole an S-ranked mission," he shouted at the end while looking back towards his friend, who acted as if he didn't hear the blonde.
"Yay. Listen, we have other problems now. That damn bastard went to finish the ritual," Natsu said seriously as the blonde nodded. "Any idea where you went?" he asked as the pink-haired boy grinned in reply and pointed towards the floor. Naruto's eyebrow shot up before a look of understanding appeared on his face. "I see," he stated as he extended his right hand towards the Dragon Slayer. A medium-sized fireball appeared in his palm. The pink-haired mage looked at it curiously and then at the blonde. "A little boost," Naruto replied to the unspoken question, making Natsu grin in reply. The pink-haired Dragon Slayer bit into the fire, eating half of it in one go. He took a second bit from the remaining fire, eating it up and burping in satisfaction. "So much better than before," he said, giving the blonde a thumbs up. "I try my best," he replied with a grin as the Dragon Slayer punched his knuckles together. Fire appeared around his hands as he punched the floor, making a massive hole. He began to continuously punch the floor until it collapsed. Naruto took a step forward and peered down in the hole his friend made. He whistled slightly. When he read about the salamander and his destructive power, he didn't image it like this. He took a deep breath before jumping in the hole. Seconds later, he reached the basement. He crashed in the ground, making dust lift in the air. He then looked around. Naruto then heard Natsu shout and turned towards him. His eyes widened as he saw the large demon encased in ice. "Deliora?" he asked himself. He knew that the demon had vanished without a trace after ravaging villages. He never expected to find it here, however. "Oh," a voice echoed from the right. "If it isn't the great Ignis Deus." Naruto turned his head to the side and looked at person that called his name with narrowed eyes. "I assume you're the one trying to revive the demon," he stated in a low voice as the person grinned behind the mask. "Naruto," Natsu called out. "This isn't good. Someone is performing the ritual." The blonde turned to face the demon once more. His eyes widened as he saw a ray of light hitting the ice and melting it away. "Shit. Natsu, go and stop the ritual," Naruto shouted as the pink-haired mage began running towards the exit. "Way ahead of you," he called out. However, halfway towards the exit, he fell on his back. The blonde turned towards him with shock written over his face. He then looked up at their enemy with narrowed eyes. A pillar of fire appeared behind the blonde, which shot towards the blonde's target. Before it could even reach its target, however, it dissipated and the blonde felt a strange force hitting him and throwing him in the wall. "It's useless. Just sit and enjoy the show." "Like hell we do that," Natsu shouted as he charged forward. Naruto shook his head as he stood back up and summoned fire in his hands. He formed a bow and pulled the string back. 3 fiery arrows appeared on the bow. "Get down," he shouted as the Dragon Slayer complied and moved out the way. The 3 arrows whizzed past him and moved towards their target. Their enemy scoffed as he moved his hand in front of him, making the arrows vanish in this air. His eyes widened, however, as 3 arrows appeared in front of him out of nowhere. He jumped out the way. The arrows crashed in the wall behind him, exploding on impact and leaving a burnt mark on the wall. He turned to face the 2 fairy tale mages and grinned. As the 2 prepared to attack once again, a deafening roar stopped them in their tracks. The blonde looked with wide eyes as the demon known as Deliora roared. its upper body freed from the ice that contained it. There it is! The man shouted as the beast roared a second time. Naruto looked towards Natsu, who was in a state of shock of what was happening. Natsu! He called out, trying to draw his attention. It seemed to work as the pink-haired mage turned towards him. Do as I tell you and we will take it down before it can even strike, he called out as the man turned towards the two. Ah, I almost forgot about you, he stated as a powerful force suddenly appeared around the blonde, making him crash in the ground and unable to move anymore. I can't have you interrupt this ritual, O legendary demon slayer, he stated with a wicked grin as the demon roared for the third time. You bastard! Natsu shouted as he charged forward, only to have a ball hit him in the chin, making him fall on his back. He jumped back on his feet and summoned his powers. He punched the ball, shattering it, its pieces falling on the ground. Moments later the pieces lifted up in the air and reconstructed the ball, which moved towards the pink-haired mage once again. This time he anticipated the attack. The dragon slayer ducked as the ball whizzed over his head. He grinned. His moment of victory, however, was cut short as the ball suddenly slammed in his stomach, throwing him in the air. While Natsu was fighting, the mysterious mage Naruto was struggling to stand up on his feet. He looked up towards the demon and his eyes widened. It was freed. Just then he felt the weight lift up from his body. He looked towards Natsu and was surprised that his friend had defeated the mage. Gritting his teeth, the blonde stood up and looked towards the demon. The demon roared once again, making the blonde grab his ears in pain. As soon as the throbbing died down, he heard Natsu shouting. He turned towards the dragon slayer one more time and his eyes widened as he saw Gray in a position he had only read about. Gray! He shouted, gaining his attention. Stand down! He called out as the ice mage glared in reply. It's the only way. I have to seal it, he called out. You retard! The blonde shouted. Using that opportunity, Natsu moved in front of Gray, facing the demon. Move out of the way, Natsu! The ice mage called out. The mage in question turned his head slightly towards Gray and looked at him with a serious expression. I stopped you earlier because I didn't want you to die, he stated as Gray's power began to vanish slightly. Didn't my voice reach you? The ice mage looked at his friend at a loss of words. His eyes suddenly widened as he saw the demon move. Look out! Deliora raised its arm to strike. Naruto's eye widened as he took a step back. He then relaxed as he noticed something. It's dead, he whispered to himself as cracks appeared on the demon's arm. Moments later, its entire body crumbling, piece of it falling on the ground all around them. As the demon vanished, its body lying in pieces on the ground, Naruto let out a sigh and let his body drop on the ground, his back resting on the wall behind him. He had read about the Deliora. If the stories were true, then the demon was as strong or close in strength to Inferno. He didn't know if Gray and Natsu could take it down. He knew he couldn't take it down in his current state. The blonde looked towards his companions, a small smile appearing on his face. Seriously, you should have waited, Naruto snickered as Urza berated him. She was helping him walk out of the temple. The rest of the mages were already outside, celebrating their accomplishment. When it comes to demons, I just can't wait for a reply, he stated as the girl spared a glance towards him. You wouldn't understand, he continued, stopping her from asking any question she might have asked. And why is that? She asked as the blonde kept silent. She glared slightly at him as she let go of his arm and pushing him to the side. The blonde staggered, trying to regain his balance. As soon as he did, he glared towards the girl's retreating form before sighing in defeat and following her. Once outside, he watched in mild fascination as Urza held both Happy and Natsu from trying to run away, at the same time giving them a small speech, berating them for their little theft. He then looked towards Gray as he helped his old friend walk out of the temple. It's done. He turned back towards Natsu as he and Happy began to celebrate their victory. Lucy and Gray soon joined them in their celebration, thought Gray not as enthusiastically as them. Naruto walked forward, stopping next to Urza, a grin present on his face. I think they forgot something, he whispered to her as the girl grinned towards him. She turned to face the four and put her serious face on. The blonde coughed, gaining their attention. As soon as they laid their eyes on Urza's serious face, they began to shiver as the mood died down. Gray looked away, trying to keep himself composed, even though he was shivering uncontrollably. She began to explain them that even though they will be punished for what they had done, they still had one last thing to do before completing the quest. Naruto turned around and began walking away as they began to question Gray's old friend for answers. The way back to Fury was uneventful. Naruto watched as the pirates did their work in taking them back, this time making sure not to get close to the rum anymore. While he was doing that, Urza kept a close eye on Natsu and Gray, just to make sure they didn't try running away.
As they reached the port, they made their way towards the train station when the blonde stopped. He looked towards a nearby alleyway and then back at his companions. He excused himself, telling them that he had business to attend to and vanished in the crowd. His friends didn't inquire as to what business he had and continued walking.
Naruto looked around him before entering the alley. When he was sure that no suspicious eyes were watching him nor that any of his comrades followed him, he walked deeper into the alley. "Impressive, your senses are sharp as ever." A voice praised the blonde as he stopped walking and looked in front of him. "Doubt I'd be able to sense you if you didn't want me to mistgun," he replied with a grin as the man nodded. It was true. "So, to what do I owe this pleasure?" he asked as the man walked out of the shadows, stopping in front of the blonde. "There's been trouble at the guild while you were gone," he stated, making the blonde look at him with a serious expression. "The guild was attacked by Phantom Lord and completely trashed," he stated, making the blonde stiffen and clench his fists. "Those assholes," he rasped out as he closed his eye in anger. "Don't." Mistgun started while raising his hand in front of the blonde. Said blonde looked up at his friend with anger in his eyes. "I know you want to make them pay, but we have other business to take care of." His eyes widened at what he heard. "What's more important than helping the guild?" he growled out, trying to keep his voice down. They didn't need people coming here and listening to their conversation. "I've dug up some information on them. Most likely Master Makarov won't sit it out for too long and Fairy Tail will strike Phantom Lord. If not, it will be the other way around," he explained as Naruto visibly relaxed. "Either way, there will be a battle between the two guilds. We will have to make sure Fairy Tail wins it." Naruto nodded. "So what's the plan?" he asked as Mistgun pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to the blonde. He unrolled it. It was a map with several X's all around Magnolia at few kilometers distance. "Those are the subdivisions of Phantom Lord. We will take them out and cut Phantom Lord from their reinforcements, making the odds even," the masked mage answered as the blonde grinned. 50-50? He asked as his partner nodded. "All right, I'll take the northwestern ones. That will leave the southeastern ones for me," Mistgun replied as the blonde rolled the map and pocketed it. "Where do we meet after it's done?" he asked. "Poor Lyuzuka's forest. However, if you wish to join the fight, feel free to do so. But deliver the flags to the forest beforehand," he told the blonde as he turned around and began walking away, vanishing in the shadows. The blonde grinned as he turned around and walked out of the alley. There was just another matter he needed to take care of before going to take out the subdivisions. He closed his eyes and concentrated until he felt the pull of his image. In Era, the image of the blonde shimmered for a second. It narrowed its eyes as it walked out of the study and through the hallways. He made his way to the messenger post on the bottom level. The guards saluted as they let him pass. Once inside, he scanned the area. Half of the messengers were gathered here, relaxing, either drinking, chatting, sleeping or minding their own business. With a wave of his hand, the entire room was flooded by magic. The image made sure not to use too much so as not to alert the rest of the councilmen. In a matter of seconds, the messengers began falling asleep, succumbing to the image's magic. A little trick it had learned from the vast library. Pleased with what it had done, the image turned and walked out the door, closing it behind it. "I have a job for you too," it stated to the guards, which looked at it curiously. "The messengers have been working a lot. They deserve a day off. If any come back, tell them to rest and to forget whatever they had to do," he stated in a calm voice. "But sir," one of the guards started, "what if they have an important message?" he asked as the image raised an eyebrow and looked towards the guard. "Tell them to rest, it can wait till tomorrow," it stated as the guards nodded, complying with the order. Satisfied with the answer, the image began walking away, a smirk forming on its lips. The way was now clear. The last thing that the blonde needed was for the council to get the news of a battle between two guilds. He was more than sure they would place the blame on Fairy Tail. He couldn't allow something like that. Any messengers that would arrive with an important message would be dealt by the image. Unless the message was regarding the battle between the two guilds, the image wouldn't interfere. Slowly, the blonde opened his eyes and looked around. People walked past him. None suspected that he had done something. With a grin he cracked his knuckles and turned towards the north. It was time to deal with the little pests.
The walk to the first subdivision was uneventful. The roads were free of bandits, or it might have been the fact that any bandits knew by now not to try and attack him. He had quite a reputation. They feared him and knew not to cross paths with him. He stopped as a small town appeared in front of him. The first subdivision was here.
He moved his hand up to his eye patch. Before he could lift it he stopped and thought it over. Maybe he shouldn't, it would be too much if he used that power. He wasn't aiming to kill anyone, just to beat them until they couldn't walk for a whole week. Slowly, he lowered his hand and began walking in the town. Everything looked normal. It was just another town in Fury. Merchants on the streets selling goods, people buying or walking around tending to their business. He looked around trying to spot a bar so he could gather information on the subdivision. Just listening to people around would give him the answers he needed. His eyes rested on a bar to his right. Slowly he walked towards the entrance and opened the door. He walked inside and looked around. No one turned to see who entered. That was good. He didn't need people to recognize him just yet. If they did they might become suspicious and alert the guild of his presence. Naruto walked towards a table in one of the corners, away from people's view. He sat down and looked around. Most of those present in the bar seemed to be travelers or locals. He couldn't spot any mages.
After 15 minutes the doors opened again and 3 people entered the bar. They walked towards the counter and sat on the stools there. They began chatting and laughing as the bartender brought them their drinks. The blonde raised an eyebrow as he leaned forward and concentrated.
And Master Jose said we'd get a shitload of money. One of them stayed before taking a big gulp. Ravaging fairy tale is just a bonus. He laughed as Naruto grinned. They were part of the target guild. What about the council? One of them inquired as the first one laughed. Master Jose said the council will place the blame on fairy tale. The plan is to have them disbanded, he replied as his colleague cheered next to him. Maybe we will get one of their members. Having one of their S-class mages would be beneficial, he stated as Naruto stood up and began walking towards them. Imagine having the Titania in our guild, the first one whispered with a big grin as the other two began daydreaming. You'd like that, wouldn't you? A voice inquired from behind them. Huh, you don't know half of it, pal. The one in the middle replied as he turned around to face the newcomer. His face morphed into that of fear as he dropped the cup he was holding. In front of him stood Naruto grinning like a madman and punching his left palm with his right fist. He moved his head left and right several times making cracking sounds. I heard you were part of Phantom Lord. He began. I also heard you ravaged our guild. He finished with an insane look in his eyes.
Moments later a body was thrown out of the bar. The entrance was broken as the body rolled on the ground in the middle of the street. Another one was then hurled out of the bar through one of its windows. The man crashed in a cart with fruits. Finally, a third one was thrown through the bar's wall, making a large hole in it. The body landed in the nearby fountain. Seconds later the blonde walked out of the bar with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at the 3 mages as they groaned in pain. The blonde shook his head. They were incredibly weak. All he did was punch them several times in the face, kick them in the nuts and then throw them away. He didn't even have to use his fire. The blonde then heard one of the merchants screaming in fury. He looked towards the cart that had been destroyed and walked over to it. He grabbed the man laying in the remains of the cart, all covered in various juices from the fruits he had squashed, and hurled him away, the man landing on one of his colleagues. The fire mage rummaged through his pockets and took out several jewels. For the damage, he stated as he handed them to the merchant, who looked at them with wide eyes. It was double the amount it would cost to buy a new cart and enough to pay for the goods he lost. The mage in the fountain groaned as he tried to stand up. A hand suddenly grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. He opened his eyes and stared in fear in the blue eye of the fire mage. Now that the beating is done, time to ask some questions. The mage before him stated with a grin. Or you could just be a defiant bastard and let me beat you some more. He told him with a smirk, making the man shiver and cry silently. What do you want? He asked with a scared voice as the blonde punched him in the chest. What was that for? He cried out in pain as Naruto shrugged. Just felt like doing it. He replied as the man started praying to the gods for salvation. Now, where is your guild? He asked as the man gulped and pointed down the street. Keep going down and then turn to the left at the mayor's house, then keep going down the street and the guild will be there. He replied as Naruto sighed sadly.
And here I thought I'd get to beat you up some more, he replied as he turned around with the man and started walking away. He walked towards the man's colleagues that were still ing on the ground. He then looked towards the man he was carrying and grinned as he dropped him on the ground and delivered a punch in his face, making the man lose conscious. Pleased with the work he had done, he pulled his cowl over his head and left the area, his destination the subdivision guild in the town. People around him looked in wonder, and as he left they rushed towards the downed men to check on them. They wondered what they had done to piss off someone from Fairy Tale. A few minutes later the blonde arrived at the guild. He looked at the structure in front of him. It wasn't special at all, just another random building that had been turned into the guild. He saw the flag he needed to take once the job was done. He lowered his head and made contact with the large door. Slowly, he walked towards the door and pushed it open, attracting the attention of everyone in the guild. He scanned the area. There were at least 40 mages, and he could see the master as well in the back. Naruto heard someone call out, asking him what he wanted. The blonde ignored the question as he began walking forward. People looked at him curiously before one of them noticed the symbol on his hand. The man began to whisper to his colleagues who he was, and they began to put together one with one. There was only one reason why the mage from Fairy Tale was here. They stood up and walked towards the blonde, making him stop in the middle of the guild. He looked around. They surrounded him from all directions. All of them were glaring at him. Some of them were cracking their knuckles in an attempt to intimidate him. "What do you want?" the master asked, a tall man in his early 30s. A large beard, he was wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses. It made the blonde raise an eyebrow at his sense of fashion. "Oh, nothing really," he started nonchalantly as he looked around. They inched closer towards him. Some were already preparing their attacks. "Just want to beat the shit out of you all and take your flag," he finished as he lowered his cowl and smiled towards them. A few of the mages took a step back in shock and fear as they recognized who the blonde was. The others steeled themselves. They outnumbered him greatly, and they were sure that not even a mage of his caliber could take them all on. The blonde smirked as he looked towards them. "You got balls, little fairy, coming here with your bold proclamations," the master taunted as some of the members began to laugh, trying to intimidate the blonde even further.
"At least I have them," he taunted back with a smirk as the laughter died down and the guild's master stood silent. Slowly, he brought his hands up to his glasses and took them off. He stared at the blonde in the eyes. "You," he started, pointing towards the blonde with a snarl. "You'll die today," he stated as the blonde's smirk widened. "Seems I hit a bullseye." He laughed as the man's eyes widened in anger. Moments later he charged forward, sending a punch towards the blonde's face. Naruto ducked under the punch as he felt the air above him shift. A small explosion reached his ears as he looked behind him with the corner of his eyes. The wall had been shattered by the force of the punch. "Impressive," he muttered as he jumped out of the way, avoiding another punch. "So this is your magic," he continued muttering to himself as he ducked under another punch. His eyes then narrowed as he moved his body upwards, grabbing the man's arm and turning around. He tried to snap his elbow, but before he could try he was forced to jump out of the way to avoid several knives thrown in his direction. As he landed he scanned the area around him, remembering that he was now fighting an entire guild and not just one or two people. He grinned as fire burst around him, forming several wild animals. They growled as they moved around the blonde in a protective manner. Some mages backed away, trying to figure out how to proceed, while others charged in blindly, their guild master included. Naruto scoffed as he saw the guild master charge blindly in the battle. Clearly he wasn't fit for the role of a guild master, but then again this wasn't his problem. He looked towards his summons and nodded as they all charged forward, colliding with the approaching mages. Several of them were thrown to the ground as the summons began to claw their faces and bite them. The other summons were punched away or thrown away through the use of magic from those mages that knew how to react in time. Naruto ducked as the guild master reached him and delivered a punch. He jumped, avoiding a leg sweep, and blocked the man's leg as he tried to kick him away. He spun around, grabbing the man by the arm and throwing him over his shoulder in the nearby wall. Fire burst behind the blonde. A scream could be heard from behind him. He turned around and looked at the mage that was covering his face and moving backwards. Before he could move out of the blonde's reach, he grabbed the man by the throat and punched him as hard as he could in the stomach. He then grabbed his head and slammed him on the floor, rendering him unconscious. Finally, he spun around and unsheathed his sword, raising it in front of him. An axe connected with his sword. The mage before the blonde jumped away, morphing his axe into a large maul. He swung it towards the blonde, who jumped up in the air avoiding the weapon. Naruto spun in midair and landed with his feet on the ceiling. He pushed himself downwards, falling on top of the mage.
With his hands he grabbed the man's shoulder. He turned his body, landing behind the man and lifting him in the air. He grit his teeth as he lifted the man up and then threw him in the wall, making him collide with his guild master. Said guild master had just gotten back on his feet when the mage collided with him, sending them crashing through the wall and landing outside on the street.
The blonde then felt a thud as numerous silk threads shone around him. He scanned the area and noticed a woman in the back moving her hands towards him as if controlling the threads with her fingers. With a grin, the blonde summoned his fire, which in turn encompassed his entire body. The threads caught fire, forcing the woman to stop her spell and back away so as not to get burned. Moments later, the blonde burst through the crowd, sending a large number of them in the walls and tables. He appeared in front of the woman, looking at her with narrowed eyes. Before she could react, he delivered a punch, making her stagger backwards. He grabbed her by the hair and moved behind her, ignoring her cries of pain. He swept her legs with his foot, turning her body so as she would face the floor. Finally, the blonde released her hair and elbowed her in the back, sending the mage in the floor. The body connected with a large thud as dust lifted in the air around her. She gasped for air and tried to stand up. A hand grabbed her hair once more as her head was then slammed 2 times in the floor. Satisfied with his work, the blonde released the woman and stood up straight, looking around. Most of the guild was still having trouble taking down his summons. Very few were left standing. "You," he heard the guild master call out in anger. He turned towards his location and smirked. "I'll make you pay," the man shouted as he charged forward, his face red from anger. Naruto moved to the side, avoiding the first strike. He ducked under the second strike. He spun around the man as he tried to smash him with his fists. The blonde kept on dodging the attacks and moving closer to the other mages. Each time the guild master delivered a punch, he would hit one of his own, rendering them unconscious in one go. Naruto had to give him credit. He was definitely strong if he could render people unconscious in one go. That or the mages here were incredibly weak. It wasn't long before they were all down, out for the count. The guild master was panting after trying to hit the blonde for 30 minutes with no luck. He was now completely surrounded by the blonde's summon. Said blonde stood in front of him with his arms crossed over his chest and a victorious grin on his face. "The council will get you," he rasped out as Naruto walked forward and closed his fist. "That is where you're wrong," he stated, moving his arm back. "I am part of the council," he whispered loud enough for the man to hear before punching him in the face and sending him flying through the guild's walls back outside in the street. Naruto looked around one last time to make sure that they were all down for the count. Satisfied with his work, he walked out of the guild, hitting any mages that were laying on the ground in his way. As he walked back in the street, he turned around, looking at the building and ignoring the people gathered around. He summoned his fire and ordered it to retrieve the flag. It did as it was told. The fire moved up towards the flag, ripping it down and letting it fall in the blonde's hands. "One down," he muttered to himself as he turned around and began walking away, dragging the flag behind him. A lone figure walked through the street. It was dark outside, close to midnight. The wind blew gently, giving the world around him voice. The only sounds that could be heard in the night were his footsteps, the wind, and the occasional alley cat. There were no guards patrolling the streets as this was a relatively small town. They had no need for a town watch due to the mage guild here. The fact that a mage guild existed in this town kept bandits and brigands away from the town. They knew it was hard, next to impossible, to defeat a guild in their home turf. The guild itself wasn't the strongest, it wasn't the largest as well, but the fact that it was a branch of Phantom Lord, it made people think twice before trying anything. Naruto, however, he didn't care about that. He wouldn't have been here if he didn't know that he could take them on. That and the fact that by now Makarov, or Phantom Lord, had started the battle between the two guilds. It took him 2 days to get here. He had only 2 more guilds to take care of, one of which he was about to start with. The blonde came to a halt as he reached his destination. He looked up and studied the building in front of him. A frown appeared on his face. This wasn't exactly what he had been hoping for. The guild didn't look like a guild at all. It looked more like a sort of casino. The entire street was illuminated by the signs on the guild, and only by the signs. He sighed a little and wondered how they managed to get all the money to build this. There was no way they gathered money through missions. Shrugging, the blonde stopped thinking about that and walked up to the door. He checked to see if it was open.
When the door didn't budge, he summoned his fire and burned it down, casually stepping inside. Once inside, he was taken aback by what he saw. The entire place looked like a casino. There were gambling tables everywhere, slot machines, a stage for who knows what, and a large bar at the end of the guild. Walking up to a machine, he looked at it and wondered just how much money was in this place. He quickly shook his head. He wasn't a thief. Makarov wouldn't be pleased if he stole. But then again, the fire mage smirked as he thought better. This was one of Phantom Lord's subdivision. Makarov wouldn't mind if he took some compensation from them. After all, he was going to raise the building to the ground and beat the members to an inch of their lives. He placed his finger on the machine and began walking forward. Flames moved out of his fingertip and into the machine, melting parts away and letting the money drop on the ground. The machine's alarms started to sound as they began melting away. It was only a matter of time before the guild members would arrive to see what was happening. Fire burst from his fingers and began consuming everything in its way. He looked around at all the expensive items that were burning away and grinned. They deserved this. The blonde came to a halt as he heard shouts and footsteps coming from the stairs. He turned his head towards the stairs and watched as the guild members appeared in the casino. They covered their eyes as the fire burst in front of them before vanishing. They noticed the man looking towards them. "You," one of them shouted in anger. "What have you done?" Naruto didn't reply. He smirked, however, and raised his head slightly so that they could see his smirk. They shook in anger as the blonde's smirk widened. He was planning on endings this fast, before the townspeople would try to put out the fire or go inside the guild to help, or rescue those that are trapped. He raised his palm and pointed it towards the group. Fire burst in front of them and exploded, sending the small group flying in the stairs or making them fall on their comrades. They groaned as they got back up on their feet and frantically looked around the guild for the intruder, yet the blonde seemed to have vanished. "Don't just stand there," the guild master shouted in anger. "Put that fire out and find that bastard," he yelled as the mages began running in all directions. A few of them began casting spells and trying to put out the fire, but each time they extinguished the fire in one spot, it would reappear seconds later. Naruto silently laughed as he saw them try to put out his fire. It would take much more to extinguish an elemental's fire. Silently, he unsheathed his sword and chanted. The fire slowly intensified around the blonde. As he finished chanting, he stood up and cut the air in front of him with his sword, sending a wave of fire. The attack alerted the mages that were searching for him. They turned towards the source of magic and their eyes widened as they saw the large wall of fire racing towards them. They jumped out of the way just in time as the fire collided with the ground and the machines, igniting everything it touched. With a grin, the blonde vanished once again, consumed by the flames, only to reappear moments later behind a mage and swiftly knocking him out. This attracted the attention of everyone else and soon numerous spells were cast towards his location. Naruto jumped out of the way as the bulk of their attacks crashed in the wall and the fire, creating an explosion that ripped the wall apart. The blonde fire mage ran behind the slot machines and ducked under them as another hail of attacks flew above him. With a soft sigh, he placed his palms on the ground. Fire spewed around him, consuming him and vanishing moments later. A little trick he had learned from the elemental. As long as there was fire around, he could warp within it to any location. "Where is he?" one of the mages inquired as he looked around frantically. A crack echoed in the guild, drawing everyone's attention to the ceiling. A large wooden plank fell from the roof, crashing on the ground just a few feet away from them. The mages covered their eyes to protect themselves from the ash. It gave Naruto enough time to reappear and make quick work of two more mages. Appearing behind them, he grabbed them by the head and pummeled them to the ground. He then charged forward, grabbing the next mage and vanishing with the fire, only to reappear on the stage. He turned the mage around and punched him as hard as he could in the stomach, making him gasp for air. He then slammed his knee in the mage's chin, making him fly backwards and drop on the stage. Finally, he summoned his flames and created a shield behind him as another set of attacks were thrown towards him. With a grin, the blonde spun his sword around his fingers and then plunged it in the ground. After whispering the name of the attack, the flames consuming the guild began morphing. In a matter of seconds, they took the shape of small elementals. The guild's mages stood rooted in fear at what they were seeing. The elementals turned their attention towards the mages. They growled as they moved towards their targets. The mages steeled themselves as they began throwing all their attacks against the elementals. While they were kept busy by the elementals, Naruto moved towards their guild leader. The man, sensing the blonde approaching, spun around and slammed his fist in the ground, making spikes burst out of the floor. The fire mage jumped in the air, dodging them before being consumed by fire and reappearing behind the guild master. The man once again spun around and hit Naruto in the head with his arm, sending the mage in the wall. The blonde shook his head as he turned towards the man and growled. He jumped back on his feet and grabbed his sword once more. He rushed towards his target, dodging under another fist and slamming the flat end of the sword on the man's back. A cry of pain echoed from the mage. The cry then turned into a hatred-filled howl as he spun around and grabbed the blind by the head, slamming him on the floor. However, before his head could collide with the floor, the flames consumed him once more, burning the man's hand. He screamed in pain as he released the blonde, who jumped back on his feet and kicked the guildmaster in the chin. Naruto then spun around and raised his leg, then he lowered it on top of the mage's chest, making him gasp for air as he crashed in the floor. Slowly, the blonde bent towards the man and smirked as he looked up with a pained look. Before he could react, the blonde's fist came crashing down on his face, rendering him unconscious.
Panic rolled over the streets of the small town. People were running around calling for help, calling for others to help them put out the fire that had ignited in the local guild. It was in the middle of the night when it happened. Everything started with an explosion from inside the guild. No one knew if the mages were still inside or not.
From afar, a person stood watching the building burn down. No matter how much water the townspeople would throw, the fire wouldn't die down. He grinned slightly as he raised his hand and looked at the second flag he had acquired. Behind him stood a large number of people, all of them tied up and with gags in their mouths to ensure they wouldn't make a ruckus.
He stood up and walked towards the man in front of the group, crouching down to his level as he reached him. The man glared, making the blonde mage grin in satisfaction.
"You should have known this would happen," he stated as the man growled. "Your leader messed with the wrong guild. Be happy it was me that came after you and not my colleague." The mage laughed.
In response, the man spat, making the blonde pull back in disgust. He brought his hand up to his cowl and wiped it with a disgusted look on his face. "Fuck you," the man spat out as the blonde turned to glare towards him.
With a swift move, he punched him in the face, making the mage fall on his back. "Maybe I should have let you burn in there," he muttered in disgust as he moved towards the group and began hitting their pressure points, putting them to sleep. As the last one fell unconscious, he packed the flag and pocketed it. He then turned around and vanished in the night. The villagers would find them the next morning, and by then he would be far away. Naruto scratched his head as he looked at the road signs. He knew the way to Magnolia, but he was surprised when he saw that the signs had changed. The name of the town had been cut out. Or more like the sign showing the way to the town had been ripped. He shook his head, already knowing who could have done it, or at least having an idea.
With a shrug, he continued walking at a steady pace. A few minutes ago, a merchant leaving from Magnolia told him of what was happening in the town. He talked about a giant machine prepping to take down Fairy Tail's guild. He was put on the edge by that, but he kept his composure. He was more than certain that the mages of Fairy Tail would stop it and ultimately stop the destruction of their guild. He was already planning on joining the fight once he handed over the flags. He just needed to see what they were going up against and prepare for all possible scenarios. The blonde suddenly came to a halt as he noticed a peculiar figure in the distance. A man with long spiky white hair. A large scroll on his back. If he thought better though, that scroll was massive. He was wearing an interesting robe. The mage looked at the man who seemed to be scribbling something in a notebook. He started walking again. As he got closer to the man, he stopped writing and looked up towards the blonde. He blinked before he grinned and stood up. "Ah, finally a traveler," he said as if he had been waiting on the side of the road for an eternity. In fact, from the way he said that, it sounded like he hadn't encountered the merchant that passed by here some time ago. "You think you can help me with a matter?" the man inquired. The blonde took this time to study him more. The person before him was old, somewhere in his 50s if he was right. He had strange red markings on his face going down from his eyes and over his cheeks. Subconsciously he tensed. The man, despite his age, might be a mage from Phantom Lord he had never seen before. Yet, the magic he could feel from him was different and very weak. From what the blonde could tell, the man's magic capacity was somewhere at the lowest of levels. Even a child no older than 12 would be able to take him down, from what he believed. "It depends," he replied cautiously as he stopped a few feet away from the man. "What do you need help with?" he continued as the man smiled, seemingly not bothered by the fact that the blonde was cautious of him.
I was going to a nearby town when I got lost at that crossroad, he stated as Naruto nodded and kept a straight face. And what town would that be? He inquired as the man rummaged through his pockets and brought out a sheet of paper. He looked over it, scrunching his eyes as if he had problems reading what was on the paper. Ortogas, he read as the blonde let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. You took a wrong turn at the crossroads, you should have taken a left. He replied as the man smiled and nodded. He pocketed the piece of paper and smiled at the blonde. The man bid his farewell and thanked the mage for the directions before heading off. Naruto kept staring at the retreating form. The man was heading towards the town where he had taken down the first subdivision. He shook his head as he turned around. There was no way that man was part of Phantom Lord, or so he believed. Oh, one more thing. He heard the man call. Be careful when you head into that town. There's some strange walking castle, or something there. Naruto turned around to ask the man what he knew about what was happening in Magnolia, yet when he turned he was surprised to see that the old man was nowhere in sight. The man had vanished. He was sure that he had been there moments ago. With wide eyes the blonde scanned the area around him, but no matter how much he looked and no matter how much he concentrated on finding any magic source in the area he couldn't detect the man. Now Naruto was even more interested in him. He carefully took a step backwards and waited. Slowly he turned around and began walking away once more. He kept looking back as he left the area as if testing to see if the man would reappear. By the time he reached the outskirts of poor Lyuzuka's forest he was having second thoughts about joining the battle. There was something about that man that made him want to find more answers. As he stepped into the forest he felt poor Lyuzuka's magic move around him, as if scanning him. She knew by now that he was here. She always knew when someone entered the forest. As he reached her cabin he saw her conversing with Mistgun. With a scowl the woman turned towards him. And another one. You two should be helping Makarov rather than staying here. She scolded. The blonde grinned as he saw Mistgun look towards him and nod once. The wind started to blow all of a sudden. Poor Lyuzuka looked up with wide eyes as numerous flags of Phantom Lord's subdivisions began falling to the ground. Naruto smirked as he walked forward and sat down on the log next to Mistgun. The woman looked down at them and sighed as she shook her head. You guys still amaze me. She told them. Aren't you joining the fight? Mistgun inquired while sparing a glance towards the blonde. Naruto stood silent for several seconds before replying. No, it's almost over. He replied. He could feel a large concentration of magic coming from the outskirts of the town. He recognized it as Makarov's. He knew what the old guildmaster was about to do. He never had the chance to see it with his own eyes, the man's ultimate attack. Slowly, the blonde stood up and began walking away. He wanted to see that attack. He wanted to know how powerful fairy law was. When he was little the old guild master told him about the attack after he had overheard him talk about it with his nephew. He didn't go into detail what it does or how it works, but the blonde didn't mind that. He had his own spells, his own attacks. Upon reaching the end of the forest he began climbing one of the trees until he reached the top. He then turned his gaze towards the outskirts of Magnolia and watched with fascination as the clouds above the walking castle of Phantom Lord began gathering, and in a matter of seconds a ray of light shot from the castle and began expanding in a circle. The blonde covered his eyes. A few moments later he lowered his hand and looked towards the battlefield. The castle was lying on the ground, dust rising in the air. Naruto sighed softly. He didn't get to see the effects of the attack, and even if the light wasn't that blinding he doubted that he could see anything from this distance. Hey, and to think I was this close to joining the fight. He mumbled to himself as he leaned on the branch planning on staying in the forest for the night. If he returned now he'd get bombarded by questions as to why he wasn't there when they needed him. Sure, they would ask him in the end, but for now he needed to rest as well. The next day Naruto returned to the guild, or what was left of it. There weren't many people there when he arrived. Makarov was helping those present with constructing the foundation for the new guild. He was surprised to see people were working this hard early in the morning. The blonde began walking forward, moving carefully so as not to disturb the workflow. Guild members smiled and greeted him as he passed by them. He offered his help but they declined, stating they could handle what they were doing. Without even noticing, the blonde bumped into a makeshift bar. He stared at the bar in wonder. He was more than certain this was the first thing they built, just to make sure they had some decent booze close by. He chuckled at that and turned around, leaning against the bar. The sun was barely up in the sky. He doubted the others would get here soon. If he knew better, Natsu was still asleep and gray as well. Though it surprised him that Urza wasn't present, she always got up early.
Glad you finally arrived. Naruto smiled as he turned his head towards Miragen. She smiled at him as she dropped several bags on the bar. You weren't here for the fight, she continued as she began rummaging through the bags and taking out supplies.
Naruto shrugged as he turned his attention towards the guild members that were working on the repairs. I might have been here to fight, but that doesn't mean I didn't fight, he replied. A few minutes later he heard the girl giggle at his reply. He began to wonder how the events played here, when Phantom Lord attacked, when the guild was wrecked. He looked at the girl with the corner of his eyes as she was arranging the food and drinks she had bought and wondered what it would have been if he was here. Could the destruction of the guild be stopped? The blonde looked away, exhaling deeply. He was thinking of what-ifs when he shouldn't. He turned his head towards Mirajane as he felt something hit his arm. He looked at the glass and smiled, picking it up. Why the long face? She asked, returning back to her work. The blonde gulped down the contents before replying. Just thinking of things. He placed the empty glass back on the counter and thanked the girl. He pushed himself forward and turned around, taking a seat at the bar. He watched her as she began arranging the drinks. You know, he started as he sat up and leaned over the bar, tried grabbing a bottle. Miragen's hand suddenly slapped his out of the way. She glared towards him as the blonde grinned and moved back. I never got to say thank you. He finished as the girl raised an eyebrow. Did I do something in particular? Mirajane inquired. Naruto smiled as he rummaged through his pockets. Moments later he took his hand out and opened his palm, showing her the item in his hand. Her eyes widened for a second before turning soft. She smiled towards him. A mix between a sad smile and an apologetic one. The blonde took her hand into his and smiled. Thank you, he told her softly, making her look down and smile. The blonde's eyes widened for a second as he saw her begin to shake. He let go of her hand and stood up. He then jumped over the bar and moved towards the girl, embracing her. Why are you crying? He asked as she put her hands on his chest and shook her head. Idiot, Mirajane mumbled softly between sobs. I'm happy, all these years. I was afraid you hated me. I was afraid that I disgusted you with what I did. Naruto cringed slightly as he tightened his hold. He moved his hand through her hair as he tried to calm her. I was never angry, I told you that already, he whispered. The girl didn't bother replying anymore as she continued to shed tears of joy. He looked around and noticed Makarov looking at them with a sly grin. He shot the old guild master a glare. The man was already thinking something else. He turned his attention back to the girl in his arms and moved his hand through her hair. He felt like he wanted to do more for her. He could feel all the pain she was holding inside her. The pain from the moment he left, when her little sister died and she stopped taking jobs. He sighed a little as he placed his head on her shoulder. He didn't really know what to do in moments like these. Sighing inwardly, he turned his attention back to the girl that was slowly calming down. He pulled back a little and cupped her cheek with his hand. She looked up at him and he smiled. Miragen returned the smile as she embraced him once more. Thank you, Naruto. She whispered, kissing him on his cheek. She then pulled back and whipped the tears from her eyes, laughing softly. The blonde smiled as he moved back and jumped on the bar, opting on sit on it. He grinned towards the girl who frowned at him. Don't sit there, we have chairs, you know. He shrugged as he turned towards Makarov, who had appeared next to the blonde. They didn't know how he did that or when he appeared. If he can do it, so can I, the old man smirked as he looked towards the blonde. Unlike you, I'm the master here, I can do what I like. He replied, only to have him and Naruto be thrown to the ground by Mirajane. I told you not to sit on the bar, she shouted as a broom connected with Makarov's head. Naruto began laughing as he saw the object hit the master. He slowly stood up, still laughing at Makarov, and then sat down on one of the chairs at the bar. The old guild master rubbed his head as he jumped on a chair next to the blonde. The two stayed in silence for some time. Mirajane had left to attend other matters, leaving the two alone at the bar. Makarov was the one to break the silence. They started with an idle chat and then proceeded to discuss the matter with Phantom Lord. The old man had yet to get word on the council or hear anything in particular from them. When he asked Naruto, the blonde told them that everything was quiet and they didn't suspect anything. He admitted though that he had a bad feeling, that something wasn't going to go right. The blonde went on, explaining what he had Mistgun had been doing while Fairy Tail fought their battle here in Magnolia. He was surprised to find out that Makarov already knew about this, or at least had an idea why he and Mistgun hadn't been present to partake in the battle. It was a week later that everything went bad, or at least bad in Naruto's opinion. For Makarov it was the same old stuff that the council always wanted to say or blabber about. It was for Naruto that things didn't go so well. While Makarov was being auditioned, he was supposed to interrogate his fellow comrades as punishment for hiding the fact that two guilds were fighting against each other, worse still, that he took part in the battle. So for one full day he stood with the Rune Knights, interrogating his fellow guildmates under the eyes of the commander who would have to report his actions to the council. He didn't need to screw up and lose his position in the council. He was sure that if he lost it, not only would he be forced to stop his search for the artifacts, but they would have the upper hand in forcing the guild to disband. So he did as he was told, even though he wanted to complain and tell them to it. He was surprised that his friends understood what was going on and didn't make a ruckus, nor did they try to make it harder for him to finish what he was supposed to do. He stood day in and day out, interrogating the members of Fairy Tail as what transpired on that day. It also helped him get a clearer image on what happened to everyone in the guild. Mistgun hadn't been very clear on the details, so for him it was good to know now. Even Natsu didn't try anything stupid, which was a plus in Naruto's mind. The sooner he was done with this job the better. Once more, Gray, I need details. The blonde said, looking up from the paper in which he was writing his friend's declaration. His face turned into a frown as he looked up at the ice mage. Where are your clothes? He asked. He was more than sure that when he entered the tent he was fully dressed. He looked towards the commander of the Rune Guards. The man looked back at him and raised his shoulders and hands, shaking his head. He too was surprised by the fact that the mage was not wearing any clothes apart from his underwear. With a sigh, the blonde shook his head and looked up at Gray with a deadpan expression. The mage grinned at him. What? He asked as if he had done nothing wrong. Let's just get this over with. The blonde answered with a sigh. Something told him that all the troubles won't end here and that he will have to face even more troubles in the future. What's going on? Lucis' attention snapped towards the source of the sound, ignoring the table as it hit Natsu, making him crash on the ground. Urza was facing Luxus, glaring at him, but what was more frightening was Naruto, whose hands were covered in fire. He too was glaring towards Luxus. It looked like he was ready to jump on the mage at any second. You dare say that again? Urza shouted angrily. Luxus smirked, unfazed by the murderous look in her eyes. Then I'll say it again, he stated, raising his hand up and pointing towards the guild members behind her. This guild doesn't need weak bastard. Urza shook in anger at that. A loud crack resonated. The mage turned his head slightly towards the blonde, whose flaming fist was burning the table in front of him. I dare you to say that again. Naruto spat out, his face scrunching into a sneer. To be looked down by a guild such as Phantom Lord. He laughed, his laughter full of malice. How embarrassing. He shouted with a sneer that turned into a smile full of malice. I couldn't show my face at all for an entire week. He spat out as he turned towards three guild members, and I'm talking about you. The three moved back a bit in fright and shock. You are a disgrace to this guild. What were your names again? He laughed as they pulled back and looked down in sorrow. The blonde suddenly shot forward as he grabbed Luxus by the collar, drawing his attention. For a second he held his breath in fright as the blonde's eyes changed color from blue to red, as if the fire was starting to consume him. You are out of place, Luxus. He spat. The mage in question only grinned as he moved his face closer to the blonde. Is that so? He whispered as he then head-butted the blonde, making him stumble back. Naruto moved his hand up to his head and then brought it in front of him. He stared at his hand and then turned his attention towards Luxus, glaring at him. You fucking piece of shit, he shouted as he jumped forward. Naruto. Don't, both Mirajane and Urza shouted, but it was too late. The blonde's fist moved forward. Before he could hit Luxus, the mage's hand shot up, blocking the blonde's fist. The fire mage growled in anger as he pushed forward. You should keep your mouth shut, boy, Naruto hissed. Makarov's grandson raised an eyebrow at that. You weren't here to take part of the battle. The man grinned, then he laughed at the blonde boy. Me? What about you, oh so great fire mage? He shouted in glee. If I were here, the guild would still be standing. If I were here, none of us would have been defeated. He shouted as he moved his face closer. If I were here, none would have looked down on the guild. I would make a better guild master than the old coot. He hissed as the blonde's eyes narrowed. Before anyone could even blink, his right hand shot up, grabbing Luxus by the head and slamming his head on the table. He then raised his up once more by the head and slammed him on the ground. The sky darkened as a thunder dropped down on the blonde, making him scream in pain. "You dare raise your hand against me, twerp!" Luxus shouted as he stood back up on his feet and grabbed the blonde fire mage by the throat. "Luxus! That's enough!" Mirajane shouted, yet the man didn't seem to hear her as he began choking the blonde. Naruto's hands shot up, grabbing Luxus's arms and trying to pry them away from his throat. Fire burst around the blonde and the lighting mage. It looked like it was about to devour both of them. "Enough!" Mirajane shouted once more, making Luxus release the blonde, who fell on the ground. He began coughing and gasping for air. Urza and Gray rushed forward and grabbed him, helping him regain his breath and getting back on his feet. "Pathetic," the lighting mage spat out as he turned around and began walking away. "Little mommy's boy can't even defend himself against someone that's strangling him." He laughed. The fire mage tried to growl and charge forward, only to be held down by Urza. "You cunt!" he rasped out as he tried to charge forward.
"Naruto, stop it," Urza whispered in a harsh tone, before embracing him. "Don't let his words get to you," she said as the blonde slowly calmed down. He sighed as he slowly stood up and moved out of her arms.
"That fucking asshole," he mumbled as he stumbled forward. He began walking towards the bar, and once he reached it he sat down, grumbling to himself. "Is he all right?" Lucy asked worriedly as Mirajane frowned slightly. She nodded however as she walked over to the blonde and asked him something. The blonde girl watched as Mirajane smiled and turned around, grabbing a bottle and then turning back to face the blonde and handing him the bottle. Lucy was taken aback by that a bit. "Why is he just sitting there drinking?" she asked, to no one in particular. It was Urza, however, that replied to her question. "To calm his nerves. It might seem strange, but that's what he does," she said before walking to the mission board and grabbing a mission. "So, Natsu, Gray, want to go on a mission?" she asked as she turned towards Lucy. "You too, Lucy, and you, Naruto," she said, looking towards the blonde mage warmly. The blonde shook his head however. "Got stuff to do, damn council," he stated, making the girl frown.
"Very well, we'll do this by ourselves," she said with a smile as Lucy cheered. Gray and Natsu however shivered slightly at the thought of having to play best pals, so as not to get on Urza's bad side. Two figures stood on top of a cliff overlooking a massive camp in the forest. In the middle of the camp stood a large portal. It seemed like it was in the air from the world. One of the figures, on the left, scoffed slightly at the sight. It was just like a war camp. Blacksmiths forging weapons and preparing them for the fighters, guards patrolling the camp, captains giving orders. "And all this, for one person," he murmured to himself. His partner however grinned in excitement at the sight. "One person, true, but if intel is right, that one person is a one-man army," he said, licking his lips. "My blade thirsts for power, the power of this world." The first looked towards his partner with a raised eyebrow. His voice was calm as he replied, yet his partner could detect a hint of anger in it. "Be careful as you stumble around here, there's no telling how strong they are." He scoffed. They were the most feared men in the world. An army wouldn't stop them, and the warriors here wouldn't be able to stand in the way of their goal. "You're talking as if you know something," he stated, a bit warily. His partner did not reply at first. His gaze was constantly on the camp below them. After what seemed like minutes he answered. "No, there is nothing here that worries me," he replied calmly, and yet he could feel like something was off with his partner. His voice, usually stoic, held more emotion now, be it incertitude, anger. It was there, that hint of emotion, and that meant that there was something special here. That, or he was waiting for something, he was waiting for something to happen. The ground shook violently. He moved back, holding himself by the wall. He looked towards his partner, who stood calmly at the edge of the cliff, still overlooking the camp. His eyes widened as he saw a massive figure fly over them. He shook, both in excitement and fear at what he was seeing. As that, he began only to be cut off by his partner. "Yes," he replied gravely, looking towards the massive creature as it roared towards the heavens. "A dragon." He finished his sentence as the dragon flew away from the camp. The man looked down towards those in camp. They were running around and preparing for a fight. He scoffed. They thought that a dragon would waste time on pitiful creatures like them. He shook his head as he turned around. "Prepare yourself, war is about to start," he whispered as his partner grinned in anticipation. "The end. Now we will see you in the next